While I lay unconscious after surgery, my husband brought his pregnant girlfriend to my hospital room. His mother said, "Maybe she'll die and solve our problem." I heard everything. When I woke up, the nurses had already set something shocking in motion. Someone was reading my medical chart who shouldn't have access to it. "Look at this," a young female voice said, papers rustling beside my bed. "It says here the surgery was more complicated than expected. Internal bleeding, extended time under anesthesia." Internal bleeding? My surgery had been routine gallbladder removal. I'd spoken to my surgeon before the procedure, and he'd assured me it was straightforward, minimal risk. So why was this stranger discussing complications that hadn't existed when I'd signed the consent forms? "That's good for us," Joshua replied, and something in his tone made my blood pressure spike despite the sedatives coursing through my system. Good for them? Medical complications were good for them? Before we continue with this story, I want to thank you for being here. If you believe that women deserve protection from financial predators who exploit trust and vulnerability, please consider subscribing. It helps us share these important stories with others who need to hear them. Now let's see what I discovered next. I forced my breathing to remain steady, keeping my eyes closed as footsteps moved closer to my bed. The familiar sound of Joshua's leather shoes mixed with the softer click of heels I didn't recognize. My husband of 8 years was in my hospital room with another woman, discussing my medical condition like it was some kind of business transaction. "Rebecca mentioned someone was asking questions about insurance policies yesterday," the female voice continued. "Detailed questions about payout procedures and beneficiary claims." My nurse Rebecca had seemed nervous earlier, fidgeting with my foreline and checking my chart multiple times. I'd assumed it was normal post-surgical monitoring, but now her behavior made terrible sense. Someone had been pumping her for information about my financial details while I lay unconscious and vulnerable. "How much does she know?" Joshua asked. "Nothing. I made sure of that. But she's suspicious about the timing. She kept asking why family members needed information about insurance procedures before the patient had even recovered." Family members. Plural. My mind raced as I tried to identify this woman's voice. It wasn't his sister, wasn't his cousin. This was someone I'd never heard before, yet she spoke with the casual familiarity of someone who belonged in Joshua's inner circle. The bed shifted slightly as someone sat down beside me. I recognized Joshua's cologne, the same expensive brand I'd bought him for our anniversary 6 months ago. His hand touched my forehead, a gesture that should have been comforting but now felt calculating. "The surgeon said she might experience memory issues from the extended anesthesia," he said quietly. "That could work in our favor." Memory issues? I tried to recall my conversation with Dr. Martinez before surgery. He'd mentioned no such risks. Standard procedure, he'd said. Outpatient surgery, home the same day. So why had I been unconscious for what felt like hours, and why was Joshua discussing memory loss like it was part of some plan? "Are you sure she can't hear us?" the woman asked. "Look at her. He's completely out. The medications they gave her would knock out a horse." But I could hear everything. Every whispered word, every rustling paper, every footstep around my bed. The anesthesia was wearing off faster than they realized, and my insurance investigator training was kicking in automatically. 8 years of detecting fraud and analyzing suspicious claims had taught me to notice details that others missed. The door opened with its familiar squeak, and I heard the soft-soled shoes of medical staff entering. But instead of the usual cheerful greetings my nurses had been giving me, there was tension in the air. "Mr. Martinez, I need to speak with you outside." Rebecca's voice was firm, professional. "We're having a private family moment," Joshua replied, his tone shifting to the charming voice he used with strangers. "It's important. Hospital policy requires that I discuss some concerns with the patient's husband." My heart rate monitor must have betrayed something because Rebecca moved quickly to my side, adjusting something on my foreline. Her fingers brushed my wrist and I felt her check my pulse manually, her touch lingering longer than necessary. "The patient's vitals are showing some irregularities," she announced. "I need everyone except immediate family to step outside." "Chelsea is family," Joshua said firmly. Finally, a name for the voice that had been discussing my medical complications and insurance policies. But who was Chelsea, and why did Joshua consider her family when I'd never heard her name before? Hospital records show only spouse and parents as approved family members, Rebecca replied, and I could hear the steel in her voice. Everyone else needs to wait in the family lounge. There was a moment of tense silence before I heard the click of heels moving toward the door. Chelsea wasn't happy about being dismissed, but she was leaving. The door closed with a soft thud. Your wife's surgery took longer than expected, Rebecca said to Joshua, but her voice was different now, more careful. There were some complications that the surgeon needed to address. Complications that didn't exist. I was certain now that something was very wrong with my medical records, and Rebecca was trying to figure out what was happening just as much as I was. What kind of complications? Joshua asked, and I caught something in his voice. Not concern. Curiosity. Like he was gathering information rather than worrying about his wife's health. Internal bleeding that required additional procedures. The anesthesia time was extended significantly, and there may be some temporary cognitive effects. There had been no internal bleeding. I remembered the surgery clearly until the anesthesia took hold, and Dr. Martinez had said everything looked routine. But Rebecca was creating a narrative, and I began to suspect she was protecting me from something I didn't yet understand. How temporary? Joshua pressed. Memory issues, confusion, difficulty processing information. Could last days or weeks, depending on how her body responds to the trauma. Rebecca was giving Joshua exactly what he seemed to want to hear, that I would be confused, vulnerable, and unable to understand what was happening around me. But why would my own husband want me incapacitated? The door opened again and I heard multiple footsteps entering. The energy in the room shifted dramatically as more people arrived. How is she? An older woman's voice, sharp and impatient. Megan. Joshua's mother, with her distinctive nasal tone and the way she always got straight to the point without pleasantries. But there was something different in her voice today, an edge I'd never heard before. Still unconscious, Joshua replied. The surgery was more complicated than expected. Good, Megan said, and that single word made my stomach drop. Maybe she'll die and solve our problem. The words hit me like ice water. Joshua's mother, the woman who'd smiled at me across countless dinner tables, who'd hugged me at Christmas morning, who'd called me daughter for 8 years, had just wished for my death as a convenient solution to some problem I didn't even know existed. Mom, Joshua said, but his tone wasn't shocked or horrified. It was cautionary, like he was warning her to be more careful with her words rather than disagreeing with the sentiment. What? I'm just saying what we're all thinking. This whole situation would be so much easier if we didn't have to deal with her. Deal with me. Like I was an obstacle rather than a human being. Like my existence was inconveniencing their plans. The insurance money would cover everything, Chelsea's voice came from near the window. She'd returned despite Rebecca's instructions, and now she was discussing my life insurance policy like I was already dead. Insurance money. My mind clicked into investigator mode, analyzing the conversation with professional detachment despite the personal horror of what I was hearing. They were discussing my death as a financial opportunity, talking about insurance payouts while I lay supposedly unconscious just feet away. Rebecca is getting suspicious, Joshua said quietly. She's asking too many questions about who has access to medical information. Then we need to be more careful, Megan replied. But this surgery was perfect timing. No one questions complications during medical procedures. Perfect timing. They had been planning something, and my gallbladder surgery had provided them with an opportunity one was only beginning to understand. The routine procedure I'd scheduled months ago had somehow become part of their scheme. What about the house? Chelsea asked. Already handled. The paperwork was signed before the surgery. Paperwork? What paperwork? I own my grandmother's house outright, inherited it free and clear when she passed 5 years ago. Joshua had no legal claim to that property, and I'd never signed any documents giving him ownership or borrowing rights. But as I lay there listening to them plan my financial destruction, I realized that my signature could be forged, especially if I was unconscious and supposedly suffering from memory issues. If I appeared confused and vulnerable, who would question Joshua's claims about legal documents or financial decisions? The full scope of their betrayal was becoming clear, and it went far beyond a simple affair. This was systematic, calculated, and had been in motion long before I'd ever felt the first pain in my side that led to this surgery. They weren't just planning to replace me. They were planning to erase me entirely, taking everything I'd worked for and inherited, while making my death look like a tragic but convenient accident that solved all their problems and funded their new life together. I lay perfectly still, controlling my breathing and heart rate, while the three people I'd trusted most in the world discussed the best ways to destroy everything I'd built and inherited from the grandmother who'd raised me to be strong, independent, and never let anyone take what was rightfully mine. They had no idea that I could hear every word, and that every syllable was being burned into my memory with the precision of someone who'd spent years documenting fraud and building cases against people who thought they were smarter than the system. The moment they left my room that first night, I knew I couldn't wake up yet. Not when I'd just uncovered the tip of what was clearly a much larger conspiracy. I had to stay unconscious, had to keep playing dead while they revealed the full scope of their betrayal. The next morning brought Dr. Martinez for his rounds. I kept my breathing shallow, and even as he examined my incision site and checked my chart. "How long do you expect her to remain unconscious?" Joshua asked, and I caught the subtle eagerness in his voice that the doctor completely missed. "Could be another day or two. The extended anesthesia from the complications can affect recovery time significantly." Complications. Dr. Martinez was repeating the narrative that Rebecca had started, but something in his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced by his own words. I wondered if Rebecca had spoken to him privately about her concerns. "Is there any chance of permanent effects?" Joshua pressed. "From gallbladder surgery? Highly unlikely. She should make a full recovery." I heard Joshua's sharp intake of breath, barely audible but telling. He wasn't hoping for my recovery, he was disappointed by the doctor's optimistic prognosis. After Dr. Martinez left, Joshua made a phone call. I strained to hear every word as he stepped toward the window. "The doctor says she'll be fine. We need to move faster. No, I can't wait another week. The bank is already asking questions about the loan application." Bank loan. My heart rate spiked and I had to concentrate on keeping my breathing steady. What loan application? I hadn't applied for any loans, and our mortgage had been paid off when I inherited grandmother's house. The signature looked perfect. "Your guy did excellent work. Yes, I understand the risk, but we're committed now." Signature forgery. Professional document fraud. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision or a crime of passion. This was an organized scheme that involved multiple people, professional forgers, and had been planned for months, possibly years. Rebecca entered during his conversation and Joshua quickly ended the call. She moved around my bed with the practiced efficiency I'd come to recognize, but I felt her pause at my wrist when she checked my pulse. "Your wife's heart rate is elevated," she told Joshua. "That's unusual for someone in her current state." "Is that dangerous?" "Not necessarily. But it suggests her body might be processing the medications differently than expected. I'll need to monitor her more closely." Rebecca was covering for me, creating medical reasons for the vital signs that betrayed my consciousness. She knew I was awake and she was protecting me. "I should stay with her tonight," Joshua said, "in case something happens." Actually, the ICU has strict overnight policies. Only one family member can stay, and we recommend patients rest without interruption. "You should go home, get some sleep. She'll be monitored constantly." Rebecca was getting rid of him, giving me space to reveal myself if I chose to. But I wasn't ready. Not yet. That evening, after Joshua reluctantly left, Rebecca approached my bed and spoke in a low whisper. "I know you can hear me. Your vitals give you away every time he talks about insurance or medical complications." He paused, adjusting my blanket. "I've been a nurse for 15 years. I've seen this before. Men who show more interest in prognosis than recovery, who ask about insurance procedures instead of treatment options." She moved closer, her voice barely audible. "I'm divorced. My ex-husband tried something similar when I was pregnant with my daughter. Made me feel crazy, questioned my memory, isolated me from family. I recognized the signs." Another pause. "If you can hear me and if you need help, just squeeze my hand once tomorrow when he's here." The next morning brought Joshua early, coffee in hand and dressed in his best suit. He looked like a grieving husband to anyone who didn't know better, but I noticed details now that I'd missed before. His wedding ring was loose, like he'd been taking it off frequently. His cologne was different, lighter, younger, probably chosen by Chelsea. Even his haircut was newer, styled differently than the conservative cut he'd worn throughout our marriage. Any changes overnight? He asked Rebecca. Her brain activity is showing more normal patterns. She could wake up any time. Could. Not will. Medicine isn't an exact science, Mr. Martinez. Some patients recover quickly, others take longer. There's no way to predict with certainty. When Rebecca checked my pulse, I gave her the gentlest squeeze I could manage. Her fingers tightened slightly in acknowledgement, and I knew I had an ally. I'll be right back, Rebecca told Joshua. Hospital policy requires me to check on another patient, but I'll return in 10 minutes. The moment she left, Joshua's entire demeanor changed. He pulled his chair closer to my bed and leaned in. I know this is hard to understand, but everything I'm doing is for the best. The house was just sitting there, gaining equity we couldn't access. The loans will help us build something better. He was talking about himself and Chelsea, not himself and me. Chelsea's been amazing through all of this. She's been taking care of everything while you've been sick. The house, the bills, even sorting through your grandmother's old things in the attic. My grandmother's belongings. Chelsea had been going through my family's personal possessions, deciding what had value and what could be discarded. The thought of that entitled stranger touching my grandmother's photos, her letters, her handmade quilts, made my blood boil. She found some interesting documents up there. Insurance policies, investment accounts you never mentioned. It's like you were keeping secrets from your own husband. He was twisting the narrative, making my privacy about family inheritance sound like deception. My grandmother had been careful with money, had saved and invested wisely, and had left me financial security that I'd kept separate from our joint accounts. Not because I was hiding anything, but because it was my family's legacy, earned through decades of hard work and sacrifice. The baby's due in 4 months. Little girl. Chelsea's already picked out a name, Emma Grace. After your grandmother, actually. She thought you'd appreciate that. Emma Grace. They were going to name their daughter after my grandmother while stealing everything she'd worked for. The calculated cruelty was breathtaking. Rebecca returned exactly when she'd promised, and Joshua immediately shifted back into concerned husband mode. Over the next 2 days, I perfected my unconscious act while gathering intelligence about the full scope of their betrayal. Chelsea visited daily, sometimes alone, sometimes with Joshua. When she was by herself, she revealed details that made my skin crawl. I've been wearing your jewelry to prenatal appointments, she told my supposedly unconscious form. That diamond tennis bracelet looks amazing with my maternity dresses. I'll probably keep it after everything's settled. She described sleeping in my bed, using my expensive skincare products, and rearranging my living room furniture to better accommodate her pregnancy needs. She talked about the nursery they were planning in what had been my home office, complete with a crib that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Joshua says you were always kind of boring anyway. Never wanted to travel, never wanted to try new restaurants. I'm going to make sure he experiences life properly. Boring. Because I'd worked 60 hours a week to maintain the comfortable lifestyle he enjoyed. Because I'd chosen financial security over impulsive spending. Because I'd valued our home and marriage over constant entertainment and novelty. The most devastating moment came on my 3rd day of conscious unconsciousness. Chelsea arrived wearing my grandmother's engagement ring, not my wedding band, but the antique ring my grandfather had saved for months to buy in 1952. I'd kept it in a safety deposit box, brought it out only for special occasions. This one fits perfectly, she told Joshua, showing off the ring on her right hand. Much prettier than her wedding set. More my style. Save that for after, Joshua warned. People might notice if you're wearing her jewelry now. But it looks so good on me. And it's not like she's using it. They'd been in my safety deposit box. Had somehow gained access to family heirlooms that represented 60 years of love and commitment. My grandparents had worn those rings through the Depression, World War II, raising 5 children on factory wages, and celebrating their diamond anniversary just months before grandfather's death. Once everything's finalized, you can wear whatever you want, Joshua assured her. The house, the jewelry, the investments, it'll all be ours to do with as we please. As I lay there listening to them plan their future with my family's legacy, I realized that this wasn't just adultery or even theft. This was the systematic erasure of my entire existence, down to the most precious symbols of the love that had created my family line. They had no idea that every word was being catalogued by someone who'd spent 8 years investigating insurance fraud, Someone who understood exactly how to document evidence and build an ironclad case. They thought they were planning the perfect crime, but they were actually confessing to someone who knew exactly how to make them pay for every single violation they'd committed against my family, my marriage, and my life. By my fourth morning in the hospital, I knew it was time to wake up. I'd gathered enough evidence to understand the scope of their betrayal, but I needed to be strategic about my emergence from unconsciousness. Too alert and they'd suspect I'd overheard their conversations. Too confused and they might see an opportunity to manipulate me further. I started with small movements, a finger twitch when Rebecca checked my pulse, a soft moan during her morning rounds. She caught on immediately, playing her part perfectly. "Mrs. Martinez? Can you hear me? You're in the hospital but you're safe now." I let my eyelids flutter, squinting against the fluorescent lights as if they were too bright. Joshua leaped up from his chair, suddenly the picture of devoted concern. "Sweetheart. Thank goodness you're awake. I've been so worried." I focused on his face with deliberate confusion, letting my brow furrow as if I was struggling to place him. "Joshua? What happened to me? You had surgery, remember? Your gallbladder. There were some complications but you're going to be fine." I touched my head gingerly, wincing. "Everything feels foggy. I remember driving to the hospital, but after that." I trailed off, watching his expression shift from concern to something that looked suspiciously like relief. "That's normal after anesthesia complications," he said quickly. "The doctor said you might have some memory issues for a while." Memory issues that he was clearly counting on. I decided to test exactly how far he'd push this advantage. "How long have I been here?" 4 days. "You've been unconscious the whole time." I nodded slowly as if accepting this information. "Have you been here the whole time? You look tired." "I've barely left your side," he lied smoothly. "Though some friends have been helping out, bringing food, checking on the house." Friends. Plural. I wondered how many people knew about Chelsea and how he'd explained her presence in our lives. Over the next few hours I played my part carefully. Confused about dates, uncertain about recent events, but gradually becoming more alert. I asked about work, about bills, about mundane details of our life together, watching him craft lies with practiced ease. "Your boss called," he said. "I explained about your condition. She's holding your position, but there's no pressure to return until you're completely recovered." My boss Jennifer would never hold a position indefinitely without medical documentation. I suspected Joshua hadn't called her at all, or had told her something entirely different about my condition. "What about money? If I'm not working?" "Don't worry about that right now. I've been handling everything. Insurance is covering the medical expenses and I've taken care of the bills." Taking care of the bills with credit cards in my name, from accounts he'd accessed without authorization. But I nodded gratefully, playing the role of the trusting wife who believed her husband was protecting her interests. Rebecca discharged me the next afternoon with strict instructions about follow-up appointments and physical therapy. As Joshua wheeled me to his car, I caught her eye and mouthed "Thank you." She squeezed my shoulder and whispered, "Be careful." The drive home revealed more evidence of their deception. Joshua's car had a new baby seat in the back. Not installed yet but clearly purchased recently. When I commented on it, he claimed it was for his sister's baby. Lisa asked me to pick it up since I was driving past the store. Lisa's youngest child was 12 years old. She hadn't needed a baby seat in over a decade. Our house looked the same from the outside, but the moment I walked through the front door I could see the subtle changes. A pregnancy pillow on our couch. Different shampoo in the bathroom. My grandmother's antique jewelry box had been moved from the bedroom dresser to the kitchen counter, as if someone had been going through it casually while cooking. "You should rest," Joshua said, guiding me toward the bedroom. "I'll make you some soup." I settled into bed, noting that the sheets smelled different. Not just clean, completely different fabric softener, maybe even different sheets entirely. Chelsea's scent lingered faintly in the room that should have been my sanctuary. While Joshua busied himself in the kitchen, I carefully examined my nightstand. My prescription bottles had been moved. The book I'd been reading before surgery was gone, replaced with magazines I'd never purchased. Even my phone charger was different, newer, still in packaging. They'd been living here. Not just visiting or staying occasionally, actually living in my house, sleeping in my bed, using my belongings as if they already owned them. Over dinner, I carefully probed for information about our finances. I've been thinking about that vacation we talked about, I said, watching his reaction. Maybe we could use some of the house equity for a nice trip once I'm feeling better. Joshua nearly choked on his soup. Actually, sweetheart, we should probably be conservative with spending right now. Medical bills, time off work. It might be better to wait. Conservative with spending while he'd been charging thousands of dollars to our credit cards for baby supplies and his girlfriend's needs. What about my grandmother's investment account? I thought about using some of that money for home improvements. Investment account? He looked genuinely confused, which told me he hadn't found all of my financial assets yet. The one she set up through her credit union. I think there's about $40,000 in bonds and certificates. His eyes widened slightly. $40,000 he didn't know about, couldn't access, and couldn't steal without my direct involvement. I don't remember you mentioning that before. Really? I could have sworn I told you about it. Maybe it's the memory issues from surgery. I was planting seeds of doubt about my mental state while simultaneously revealing assets he'd want to access. If I appeared confused and vulnerable, he might make mistakes in his eagerness to get control of money he hadn't known existed. That evening, while Joshua thought I was napping, I heard him on the phone in the kitchen. She's more confused than we hoped. Asking about things that don't exist, forgetting conversations we never had. Yes, I think we can work with this. More confused than they hoped. This confirmed that my supposed memory problems were part of their plan, not an unfortunate complication they had to work around. The house equity loan went through. We'll have access to the funds by Friday. No, she signed everything before the surgery, remember? The confusion just makes it easier to explain if anyone asks questions later. House equity loan. They'd mortgaged my grandmother's house, the property that had been paid off for 5 years, my only real security in this marriage. They'd somehow forged my signature on loan documents and were treating the borrowed money as their personal windfall. Chelsea's been patient, but she's starting to show. We need to move faster. I know the risks, but we're committed now. Move faster toward what? My death, my disappearance, or just my complete financial destruction? I'd heard enough. While Joshua finished his phone conversation, I quietly retrieved the business card Rebecca had slipped into my discharge papers. Sarah Chin, attorney at law, with a handwritten note on the back. Specializes in financial abuse cases. Mention my name. The next morning, I told Joshua I had a physical therapy appointment at 10 a.m. Instead, I drove to Sarah Chen's office, ready to begin building the case that would expose every crime they'd committed and ensure that my grandmother's legacy would never fund the happiness of people who'd wished for my death. As I sat in the law office waiting room, I realized that their biggest mistake wasn't underestimating my consciousness during those hospital conversations. Their biggest mistake was assuming that someone who'd spent 8 years investigating insurance fraud wouldn't know exactly how to document evidence and build an unshakable case against people who thought they were smarter than the system. They taught me everything I needed to know about their crimes simply by discussing them in front of what they believed was my unconscious body. Now I was going to use their own words to destroy the future they'd been so carefully planning at my expense. Sarah Chen's office was nothing like the sterile corporate law firms I'd imagined. Her reception area felt warm, almost therapeutic, with soft lighting and comfortable chairs that didn't intimidate vulnerable clients. When she called me back to her office, I understood immediately why Rebecca had recommended her. Before we begin, Sarah said, settling behind her desk with a yellow legal pad, I need you to understand that what you're describing isn't just marital infidelity. Based on Rebecca's preliminary information, we're looking at multiple felonies. Are you prepared for the legal consequences your husband will face? He wished for my death in my hospital room, I replied quietly, while I was supposedly unconscious and helpless. Yes, I'm prepared for whatever consequences follow. Sarah nodded, making notes. Tell me everything, starting with the financial irregularities you've discovered. Over the next 2 hours, I detailed every conversation I'd overheard, every suspicious transaction I'd noticed, every lie Joshua had told about my condition. Sarah's expression grew more serious with each revelation. The house equity loan is our strongest starting point, she explained. If your signature was forged on those documents, that's identity theft and bank fraud. Do you have any samples of your actual signature for comparison? I have 8 years of joint tax returns, mortgage papers, insurance documents. My signature is consistent and distinctive. Good. I'll need copies of everything. Bank statements, credit card bills, loan applications, medical records from your surgery. Can you access these without arousing suspicion? That became my mission over the following weeks. Every afternoon when Joshua thought I was resting, I was actually conducting the most important investigation of my career. I photographed bank statements while he showered, copied credit card receipts from his wallet while he slept, and systematically documented every financial transaction that had occurred without my knowledge. The scope of the fraud was staggering. Joshua had opened 3 credit cards in my name, taken out 2 personal loans using my social security number, and had somehow accessed my retirement account to take a hardship withdrawal. The total theft exceeded $80,000. But the most damning evidence came from his text messages. During one of his longer absences, I used software I'd learned about in insurance fraud cases to recover deleted messages from his phone. The conversations with Chelsea revealed planning that went back over a year. "She's so trusting she never checks the bank statements," read one message from 10 months ago. "The life insurance policy is worth $250K. House is worth at least $180. Plus her retirement accounts," Chelsea had replied. "We just need the right opportunity. Something that looks accidental." My hands shook as I photographed these messages. They hadn't just been planning to steal from me, they'd been researching ways to make my death appear natural or accidental. My gallbladder surgery hadn't created their opportunity. It had simply accelerated plans they'd already made. The more evidence I gathered, the more I realized this needed to be more than just a divorce case. Joshua had manipulated everyone in our social circle, professional network, and extended family. His coworkers believed I was terminally ill. His mother thought I was mentally unstable and financially irresponsible. Our mutual friends had been told I was controlling and emotionally abusive. That's when I conceived the dinner party. "I want to plan a recovery celebration," I told Joshua one evening, watching his face for any sign of panic. "Something to thank everyone who supported us during my health crisis." "Is that really necessary? You're still recovering and big gatherings might be overwhelming. I feel ready to socialize again. Plus, I want to show everyone how much their kindness meant to me." Joshua couldn't object without seeming unsupportive, but I caught the worried look that crossed his features. He was calculating risks, wondering what I might say or do in front of witnesses. "Who are you thinking of inviting?" "Everyone who sent flowers or cards. Your coworkers who organized that meal train. Your family, of course. Our neighbors who checked on the house. Chelsea should definitely come. You mentioned how helpful she's been." The guest list I created was surgical in its precision. Every person Joshua had lied to about my condition, our marriage, or his relationship with Chelsea would be in the same room simultaneously. They'd all hear the truth at the same time, making it impossible for him to create different narratives for different audiences. While Joshua thought I was planning a simple dinner menu, I was actually creating a multimedia presentation that would expose every crime he'd committed. The slideshow started innocently enough: wedding photos, vacation memories, family gatherings. But embedded throughout were screenshots of bank statements, copies of forged documents, and transcripts of the conversations I'd recorded during my hospital stay. Sarah helped me coordinate with Detective Maria Santos from the Financial Crimes Unit. Detective Santos had been tracking identity theft rings that targeted married women, particularly those with good credit and family assets. "Your case fits a pattern we've been investigating," she explained during our meeting. "Husbands who systematically destroy their wives' financial independence, often while the women are dealing with medical issues or family crises that make them vulnerable. Will the evidence I've gathered be admissible in court? The recorded conversations from your hospital room are legal. You were the injured party and had a reasonable expectation that medical discussions would be private. The financial documents are your own records. And the text message recovery was done on devices that were jointly owned. Your case is solid." We arranged for Detective Santos to be present at the dinner party, along with 2 other officers who would remain outside until needed. The timing had to be perfect. Enough evidence presented to make the crimes undeniable, but not so much that Joshua could claim entrapment or manipulation. Meanwhile, I was quietly securing my future. Rebecca's brother David turned out to be more than just a security consultant. He was a former police detective who specialized in protecting domestic abuse victims during dangerous transitions. He helped me open new bank accounts at a different financial institution, change passwords on all my personal accounts, and arrange for a locksmith to change every lock on my grandmother's house the moment Joshua left for our dinner party. The most dangerous time for women in situations like yours is when the abuser realizes they've lost control, David warned. We need to assume that once Joshua understands what's happening, he may become desperate or violent. David installed security cameras throughout the house, documented every valuable item, and helped me move my grandmother's most precious belongings to a secure storage unit. We also arranged for my important documents, birth certificate, social security card, passport, to be safely stored outside the house. What about after the dinner? David asked. Where will you go once everything's out in the open? I looked around my grandmother's living room at the furniture she'd saved for decades to buy, at the family photos that chronicled generations of strong women who'd survived much worse than unfaithful husbands. I'm not going anywhere, I said firmly. This is my house, bought with my family's hard work and left to me through my grandmother's careful planning. Joshua is the one who'll be leaving. 3 weeks after my strategic awakening, everything was in place. The guest list was confirmed, the evidence presentation was prepared, and law enforcement was coordinated. Joshua thought he was attending a simple recovery celebration that would reinforce his image as a devoted husband who'd supported his wife through a medical crisis. Instead, he was walking into a carefully orchestrated revelation that would expose every lie he'd told, every crime he'd committed, and every person he'd manipulated during his systematic campaign to destroy my life and steal my family's legacy. As I sent out the final dinner invitations, I realized that Joshua's biggest mistake wasn't just underestimating my consciousness during those hospital conversations. His biggest mistake was assuming that someone who'd spent 8 years detecting insurance fraud wouldn't recognize the signs when she became the target of the most elaborate scam of her own life. The evening of the dinner, I arrived at Rosario's restaurant 2 hours before the guests were scheduled to appear. The same private dining room where Joshua had nervously fumbled with my grandmother's engagement ring 8 years ago, asking me to be his wife while promising to love and protect me forever. The irony wasn't lost on me that this room would now witness the destruction of every vow he'd made. The restaurant staff had been incredibly accommodating when I'd explained I wanted to create a multimedia presentation for my recovery celebration. They helped me position the projection screen where everyone would have a clear view, tested the sound system, and even provided technical support to ensure nothing would go wrong during the most important presentation of my life. Mrs. Martinez, is there anything else you need? Asked Maria, the event coordinator who'd handled our anniversary dinners for the past 3 years. Actually, there might be some emotional reactions during the presentation. If anyone needs to leave quickly, could you make sure the exits aren't blocked? Maria looked puzzled but nodded professionally. Of course. Is everything all right? Everything will be perfect. Guests began arriving at 6:30, exactly as planned. I positioned myself near the entrance, greeting each person with genuine warmth and gratitude. Joshua's coworker Tom handed me a card signed by their entire department. We're so glad you're feeling better, he said sincerely. Josh was so worried about you. We all were. Thank you. Your support meant everything during my difficult time. Joshua's sister Lisa arrived with her husband, both of them giving me careful hugs as if I might still be fragile from my supposed ordeal. You look wonderful, Lisa said, studying my face. Much better than Joshua described. He made it sound like... Like what? Well, like you were much sicker than you appear to be. Interesting. Joshua had been managing different narratives for different people, but the inconsistencies were starting to show. Megan arrived fashionably late, making her grand entrance with the confidence of someone who believed she held all the power in family dynamics. She kissed my cheek with the same false warmth I'd endured for 8 years, never suspecting that I'd heard every cruel word she'd whispered about my potential death. You're looking surprisingly well, dear, she said, her tone carrying just enough surprise to sound backhanded. Thank you, Megan. I'm feeling much stronger than anyone expected. Joshua and Chelsea arrived together at 7:15, and I watched the room's energy shift as people tried to place the pretty young woman who seemed so comfortable at Joshua's side. He introduced her smoothly to each group of guests. This is Chelsea, a family friend who's been incredibly helpful during my wife's recovery. She's been taking care of so many things while I focused on the hospital visits. Family friend. The pregnant girlfriend carrying his child was being introduced as a helpful neighbor to people who'd sent sympathy cards and organized meal trains for what they believed was my terminal illness. "Chelsea, you're so kind to help out," said Margaret from across the street. "It must be difficult being so young and dealing with such a serious medical situation." "It's been challenging," Chelsea replied, her hand unconsciously moving to her still small bump. "But Joshua needed support and I wanted to do whatever I could." I watched this performance with fascination. Chelsea had perfected the role of the selfless family friend, while Joshua played the devoted husband bearing an impossible burden. Neither of them showed any guilt or discomfort lying to people who genuinely cared about my welfare. At 8 o'clock I called everyone to attention. "I can't begin to express how grateful I am that you're all here tonight," I began, my voice carrying across the room. "The past few weeks have been the most challenging of my life, but your support, your kindness, and your love have meant everything to me." Murmurs of sympathy and encouragement rippled through the crowd. Joshua beamed at me from his seat, Chelsea beside him looking appropriately somber. "I've put together a small presentation, some photos and memories from the past 8 years. I thought it would be nice to share some happy moments after such a difficult time." The lights dimmed and the first slide appeared on screen. Our wedding photo, Joshua and me cutting the cake with radiant smiles. The audience made appreciative sounds, several people commenting on how young and happy we looked. I continued with vacation photos, holiday gatherings, anniversary celebrations. Joshua visibly relaxed, probably thinking this would be nothing more than a nostalgic tribute that reinforced his image as a loving husband. "Marriage isn't always easy," I said as photos of our early years filled the screen. "It requires trust, honesty, and commitment. It means protecting each other's interests and never taking advantage of vulnerability." More photos appeared, Joshua and me at family barbecues, birthday parties, quiet moments at home. His co-workers smiled knowingly, his family members nodded approvingly, and our neighbors whispered about what a devoted couple we'd always seemed to be. "But sometimes," I continued, my voice growing harder, "the person you trust most in the world turns out to be someone completely different than who you thought they were." The 15th slide changed everything. Bank statements filled the screen, showing unauthorized transactions highlighted in red. Credit card bills with charges for baby furniture, maternity clothes, and pregnancy-related expenses. The room fell completely silent as people leaned forward, trying to understand what they were seeing. "These are financial documents showing $80,000 stolen from my accounts while I was supposedly dying in the hospital," I said calmly. "Money used to fund a secret life with a pregnant girlfriend while my husband told all of you that I was terminally ill." Gasps erupted throughout the room. Joshua shot to his feet, his face flushing red. "This is insane. You're having some kind of breakdown. The surgery affected your mind." "Sit down, Joshua." My voice was steel. "We're not finished." The next slides showed text messages between Joshua and Chelsea, discussing my life insurance policy, planning how to divide my assets, and calculating the value of my grandmother's house. Photo after photo of evidence I'd methodically collected over the past month. "You told your co-workers I was dying," I continued, looking directly at Tom and the others from Joshua's office. "You told our neighbors I was mentally unstable. You told your family I was financially irresponsible and controlling. Every single person in this room was lied to and manipulated to cover up an affair, identity theft, and fraud." Chelsea tried to stand, but I wasn't finished. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Chelsea Rodriguez, Joshua's pregnant girlfriend of over a year. She's been living in my house, sleeping in my bed, wearing my grandmother's jewelry, and spending money stolen from my accounts while you all sent sympathy cards for my supposed terminal illness." The room erupted in shocked conversations. Joshua's co-workers looked bewildered, his family members stared in horror, and our neighbors began putting together months of suspicious behavior they'd witnessed but hadn't understood. The final slide appeared on screen, containing just one sentence in large, bold letters. "Maybe she'll die and solve our problem," Megan Martinez said while I lay unconscious after surgery. Megan's face went white as 31 people turned to stare at her. Joshua looked like he might collapse as he realized I'd been conscious during that hospital room conversation. "I heard every word you said while you thought I was unconscious and helpless," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. "Every cruel comment about my death being convenient. Every discussion about dividing my assets. Every lie you told these good people who genuinely cared about my welfare. Detective Santos chose that moment to enter the dining room, her badge clearly visible. Behind her came 2 uniformed officers. Joshua Martinez, you're under arrest for identity theft, bank fraud, and forgery. Chelsea Rodriguez, you're under arrest as an accessory to financial crimes. As handcuffs clicked around Joshua's wrists in front of every person he'd deceived, I realized that justice sometimes requires the perfect audience to witness the perfect downfall of people who mistake kindness for weakness and trust for stupidity. The man who'd wished for my death to solve his problems had instead created the perfect solution to mine. The chaos in the restaurant dining room was immediate and electric. 31 people who'd been lied to for months erupted in overlapping conversations, their voices mixing with Joshua's protests and Chelsea's sobbing as the handcuffs clicked into place. Detective Santos maintained professional calm while reading them their rights, but I could see the satisfaction in her eyes as she arrested 2 people who'd made the mistake of underestimating their victim. "This is a mistake," Joshua shouted over the din, his voice cracking with desperation. "She's mentally unstable. The surgery affected her brain. None of this is real." Tom from his office stood up slowly, his face pale with understanding. "You told us she was dying, Josh. We organized a meal train. We collected money for your family. She was sick. The complications were real." "But the complications were a lie," I said quietly, and the room fell silent again. "Dr. Martinez can confirm that my surgery was routine. No complications, no extended anesthesia, no memory issues. Everything you told these people was fabricated to cover up your crimes." Detective Santos finished with the arrests and turned to address the stunned crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to need statements from anyone who received false information about Mrs. Martinez's medical condition, financial situation, or family circumstances. Detective Rodriguez will coordinate with you for scheduling." As Joshua and Chelsea were led away, the room buzzed with shocked conversations. I watched Megan sink into her chair, her face ashen as she realized her cruel hospital comment had been the final nail in their coffin. Several neighbors approached me with apologetic expressions. "We should have known something was wrong," said Margaret. "Joshua kept saying you were too sick for visitors, but we could see you working in your garden just days before the surgery. Don't blame yourselves. He's very good at manipulation." Sarah Chin appeared at my elbow, having witnessed the entire confrontation from the back of the room. "The timing was perfect. By morning, every asset will be protected, and they won't be able to access a single account or document." He was right. While Joshua and Chelsea sat in holding cells trying to process their new reality, a coordinated legal machine was dismantling their access to everything they'd stolen or planned to steal. Sarah had prepared injunctions freezing all joint accounts, emergency court orders protecting my grandmother's house from further encumbrance, and cease and desist notices preventing any additional use of my credit or identity. The next morning brought a phone call that changed everything about the scope of the case. "Mrs. Martinez, this is Agent Patricia Flores with the FBI Financial Crimes Task Force. We've been monitoring your case through local law enforcement, and we'd like to discuss federal charges against your husband." Federal charges. What I'd thought was a personal betrayal had apparently caught the attention of investigators tracking much larger patterns of financial abuse. "Agent Flores, I'm not sure I understand. This seems like a local matter. Your husband's systematic approach to identity theft and financial abuse while you were medically vulnerable fits a profile we've been building. We believe he may have learned these techniques from others, possibly as part of a larger network that targets married women during medical crises." The implications were staggering. Joshua's crimes weren't just spontaneous greed, they might be part of an organized scheme that had victimized other women who hadn't been as fortunate or professionally equipped to fight back. Agent Flores arranged to meet me that afternoon, bringing files that made my blood run cold. Photos of other women, other forged documents, other cases where husbands had systematically destroyed their wives' financial security during vulnerable periods. "We've identified at least 12 similar cases in Arizona alone over the past 3 years," she explained. "The methodology is almost identical: forge signatures during medical procedures, claim memory issues from anesthesia, gradually isolate the victim from financial control." "Are you saying Joshua was trained to do this?" "We're investigating connections between your husband and other perpetrators. Phone records show regular contact with men who've been convicted of similar crimes. We think there may be an informal network sharing techniques and potentially coordinating timing. This revelation transformed my case from personal revenge into something much larger. I wasn't just seeking justice for myself. I was potentially helping to expose a criminal network that had destroyed other families. Meanwhile, Chelsea's true character was emerging under legal pressure. Within 48 hours of her arrest, she'd hired her own attorney and was actively trying to distance herself from Joshua's crimes. My client was led to believe that Mrs. Martinez was terminally ill, her lawyer announced during a press conference. Ms. Rodriguez was told she was helping a grieving widower prepare for his wife's inevitable passing. She had no knowledge of any financial crimes. The audacity was breathtaking. Chelsea, who'd been living in my house and wearing my grandmother's jewelry, was claiming she'd been deceived about my health status. The same woman who discussed my life insurance policy in my supposedly unconscious presence was now portraying herself as an innocent victim of Joshua's manipulation. But her abandonment strategy backfired spectacularly when prosecutors offered her a plea deal in exchange for testimony against Joshua. The recordings I'd made during my conscious unconsciousness proved she'd been an active participant in discussing my assets and potential death, not an innocent bystander misled about my condition. Megan's damage control attempts were equally desperate and ineffective. She hired a lawyer and began claiming her hospital comment had been taken out of context, and that she'd been joking about my death solving their problems. But Rebecca had witnessed the entire conversation and was prepared to testify about the callous, calculating way they discussed my potential demise as a convenient solution. Mrs. Martinez wasn't joking, Rebecca told the prosecutor during her deposition. She was strategizing. The whole conversation was about timing, about how medical complications would provide cover for their plans. 6 weeks after the dinner revelation, Joshua was facing federal charges for identity theft, bank fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The local charges included forgery, elder abuse, and attempted theft of property. The combined penalties could result in decades in federal prison. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Recorded conversations, documented financial transactions, witness testimony from hospital staff, and now federal investigation into his connections with other similar criminals. His defense attorney was already hinting at plea negotiations. Your husband's case has become what we call a career-ending prosecution, Agent Flores explained. The evidence is so comprehensive that fighting the charges would be professional suicide for any defense lawyer. As I sat in Sarah Chen's office reviewing the mountain of legal documents that would protect my future and ensure Joshua's conviction, I realized that his systematic betrayal had actually created the perfect evidence trail for his own destruction. His methodical approach to stealing my life had provided methodical evidence of every crime he'd committed. The man who'd planned my death as a convenient solution to his moral failures had instead engineered the most thorough and devastating legal consequences imaginable for himself and everyone who'd helped him. Justice wasn't just being served. It was being served with the same calculating precision he'd used to plan my destruction, except now I was the one controlling the outcome. The first time I walked back into my grandmother's house after Joshua's arrest, I stood in the doorway for nearly 10 minutes before I could force myself to cross the threshold. David waited patiently beside me, understanding without explanation that this moment required courage I wasn't sure I possessed. "Take your time," he said quietly. "There's no rush." But there was a rush and urgent need to reclaim the space that had been violated by people who'd seen my potential death as a convenient solution to their greed. I stepped inside and immediately noticed the subtle wrongness that permeated every room. The furniture arrangements were different, pictures had been moved, and there was a lingering scent that didn't belong. Chelsea's perfume mixed with unfamiliar cleaning products. In the master bedroom I discovered evidence that made my hands shake. The mattress was new, still bearing tags that showed a purchase date from 3 weeks ago. They'd replaced my grandmother's antique bed frame with something modern and cheap. Her handmade quilts were gone, probably sold or thrown away to make room for Chelsea's preferences. But as I searched through what remained of my belongings, I made discoveries that revealed the true scope of their theft. In a shoebox hidden behind winter coats, I found receipts from pawn shops and jewelry stores. Joshua had been systematically selling my grandmother's jewelry collection, pieces that had been in our family for generations. including her mother's cameo brooch and the pearl necklace my grandfather had given her for their 25th anniversary. This receipt is from last month, I told David, holding up a slip of paper. He sold my great-grandmother's wedding ring for $300. It was appraised at over $2,000. We can recover some of these pieces through the restitution process, David assured me. Pawn shops are required to hold items for specific periods, and with documentation of theft, we can force them to return family heirlooms. The kitchen revealed more painful evidence of their domestic life. Baby preparation books stacked on the counter, prenatal vitamins in the medicine cabinet, and a refrigerator covered with ultrasound photos and appointment reminders. They'd been building their future family in the home my grandmother had left me, using furniture she'd saved decades to buy and planning to raise their child in rooms where my family had created memories spanning 3 generations. But the most devastating discovery came when I opened my grandmother's cedar chest in the guest room. It was empty except for a single note in Joshua's handwriting: sold vintage linens for $100. Antique baby clothes $200. Photo albums, garbage. Garbage. They'd thrown away irreplaceable family photographs, including pictures of my great-grandparents who'd immigrated from Mexico with nothing but hope and determination. Decades of carefully preserved memories, gone because Chelsea needed room for her own belongings. I sat on the floor next to the empty cedar chest and cried for the first time since discovering their betrayal. Not tears of self-pity or heartbreak over Joshua's infidelity, but grief for the irreplaceable family history that had been carelessly destroyed by people who saw value only in immediate financial gain. David found me there 20 minutes later, handed me tissues without comment, and began helping me catalog everything that had been stolen, sold, or destroyed. His methodical approach reminded me that this wasn't just personal loss. It was evidence in an ongoing criminal case that would ensure Joshua paid for every single violation he'd committed. The important thing is that you survived, he said as we documented the empty spaces where family heirlooms had once been displayed. Everything else can be replaced, recovered, or rebuilt. Returning to work proved more challenging than I'd anticipated. My colleagues at the insurance company had received conflicting information about my health crisis from Joshua's carefully orchestrated deception campaign. Some believed I'd been terminally ill, others thought I'd suffered a mental breakdown, and a few had been told I was dealing with family financial problems that affected my stability and judgment. My supervisor Jennifer called me into her office during my first week back. "We need to discuss the inconsistencies in the information we received about your medical leave," she said, her expression concerned but professional. "Your husband contacted us multiple times with updates about your condition, but the details changed significantly between calls. What exactly did he tell you?" Jennifer consulted her notes. "Initially, he said you were having complications from routine surgery and would be out for a week. Then he called saying you were in ICU with life-threatening issues and might not return to work at all. A week later, he claimed you were stable but suffering memory loss and cognitive issues that could affect your ability to handle complex cases." Each lie had been calculated to manage different aspects of his scheme. The life-threatening complications justified his need for emotional support from coworkers. The cognitive issues provided cover for any financial documents I might question later. The extended timeline gave him more opportunity to commit fraud while I was supposedly incapacitated. "I have medical records proving that none of those complications occurred," I told Jennifer. "My surgery was routine, my recovery was normal, and I was never in ICU. My husband was conducting an elaborate fraud scheme that required explaining my absence from normal activities." Jennifer's expression shifted from concern to amazement as I explained the basic facts of the case. By the time I finished, she was shaking her head in disbelief. "You documented all of this while pretending to be unconscious? That's investigative work beyond anything we do here." Word of my case spread quickly through the office, and instead of the sympathy or suspicion I'd expected, I found myself receiving respect and recognition from colleagues who were impressed by my methodical approach to evidence gathering. The senior partners began consulting me on complex fraud cases, particularly those involving financial abuse of vulnerable adults. "Your experience gives you insights that most investigators lack," explained Robert Chin, Sarah's husband and a fraud specialist at our company. "You understand the victim's perspective while maintaining professional objectivity about the criminal methodology." Within 3 months, I'd been promoted to senior fraud investigator with a focus on domestic financial crimes. My salary increased substantially, my professional reputation was stronger than ever, and I was invited to speak at industry conferences about detecting and preventing spousal financial abuse. The legal settlement from Joshua's crimes exceeded my expectations. The restitution included not just the $80,000 he'd stolen, but additional damages for emotional distress, the cost of recovering stolen property, and penalties for violating consumer protection laws. Combined with the recovery of assets he'd hidden and the insurance payouts from proven fraud, I found myself in the strongest financial position of my adult life. More importantly, I now understood exactly where every dollar of my money was located, how each account functioned, and what legal protections existed to prevent future abuse. The financial literacy I'd gained from investigating my own case had transformed me from someone who trusted blindly into someone who verified everything. But the most valuable part of my recovery came through working with Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a therapist who specialized in betrayal trauma and financial abuse. Our sessions helped me understand that Joshua's systematic deception wasn't a reflection of my worth as a wife or my judgment as a person. Sophisticated financial abusers target women who are trustworthy, successful, and financially stable, Dr. Rodriguez explained. Your trust wasn't weakness. It was the very quality that made you an attractive target for someone who specialized in exploiting good people. Learning to trust my instincts again required practice and patience. David's friendship provided a safe space to redevelop confidence in my ability to judge character and recognize genuine kindness. His consistent honesty, respect for my independence, and complete lack of interest in my financial situation proved that trustworthy people still existed. Recovery isn't about becoming suspicious of everyone, Dr. Rodriguez taught me. It's about developing discernment, the ability to distinguish between people who deserve trust and people who exploit it. As I sat in my grandmother's restored living room 6 months after Joshua's arrest, surrounded by recovered family heirlooms and new memories I was creating, I realized that his betrayal had ultimately set me free from a marriage built on lies and given me the opportunity to discover strengths I'd never known I possessed. The woman who'd lain unconscious and vulnerable in that hospital bed had been reborn as someone who would never again allow anyone to mistake her kindness for weakness or her trust for stupidity. The morning of Joshua's sentencing hearing arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel sharper, more defined. I dressed carefully in my grandmother's navy blue suit, the one she'd worn to important occasions, altered to fit me perfectly. It felt appropriate to have her strength with me as I witnessed the final chapter of Joshua's legal reckoning. David offered to accompany me, but this was something I needed to do alone. As I walked up the courthouse steps, I spotted a familiar figure hunched on a bench near the entrance. Joshua sat with his shoulders curved inward, wearing an ill-fitting suit that hung loose on his diminished frame. 6 months in county jail awaiting sentencing had transformed him from the confident man who'd wished for my death into someone who looked defeated by consequences he'd never imagined facing. He looked up as I approached and I saw recognition flicker across his features. For a moment neither of us spoke. I studied the man I'd been married to for 8 years, searching for any trace of the person I'd once loved. What I saw instead was someone who'd gambled everything on my destruction and lost completely. "You look well," he said finally, his voice hoarse from months of legal stress. "I am well. Better than I've been in years, actually." Joshua shifted uncomfortably on the bench, glancing toward the courthouse entrance where his court-appointed attorney was probably waiting. "I know you probably can't forgive me," he began, his words coming out in a rush. "But I need you to know that I never meant for it to go this far. The pregnancy wasn't planned, and when Chelsea told me about the baby I panicked. I made terrible decisions, but I never wanted to hurt you." The apology was everything I'd expected, self-serving, incomplete, and focused more on his emotional state than the damage he'd inflicted. I let him finish before responding. "I heard every word you said while I was unconscious. Every single word." His face crumpled as the full weight of that statement hit him. The hospital conversations where he'd discussed my life insurance payouts, the casual way he'd planned to divide my assets, the cruel calculation behind every lie he'd told about my health, he was realizing that I'd been conscious for all of it. "You heard," he whispered. "Your mother wishing for my death to solve your problems. Chelsea discussing how my grandmother's jewelry looked better on her than on me. Your phone calls about forged signatures and memory loss that would make me easier to manipulate. All of it. Joshua buried his face in his hands, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, not anger, but a strange kind of peace. The man who'd systematically planned my destruction was finally understanding the scope of what his cruelty had cost him. "The baby," he said suddenly, looking up with desperate eyes. "Emma Grace is beautiful. She has your grandmother's eyes." The audacity of naming his daughter after my grandmother while stealing everything she'd left me was breathtaking, but I realized it no longer had the power to wound me. "How is Chelsea managing?" I asked, genuinely curious about the young woman who'd been so confident about replacing me. "She's struggling. Living with her parents, working at a restaurant and cleaning offices at night. The baby has colic, cries constantly. Her parents help, but they're not happy about the situation." Chelsea's fairy tale had collided with reality. The entitled young woman who'd worn my clothes and slept in my bed was discovering that single motherhood while supporting a convicted felon wasn't the romantic adventure she'd imagined. "She doesn't visit you?" Joshua shook his head, shame coloring his features. "She can't afford the time off work, and her parents forbade her from bringing Emma to jail. They said they won't let their granddaughter be exposed to this environment." "What about your mother?" "Mom's been..." He paused, struggling with the words. "She had to leave her church. People were talking, saying terrible things about her, wishing you were dead. Her friends won't speak to her anymore. She moved to Phoenix to live with my aunt, but even family gatherings are awkward now." Megan's cruel whisper had destroyed more than just her relationship with me. It had made her a pariah in the community where she'd lived for 40 years. The woman who'd thought my death would solve their problems had created problems that would follow her for the rest of her life. A bailiff appeared at the courthouse entrance and called Joshua's name. His sentencing hearing was about to begin. "Will you be there?" he asked as he stood, adjusting the jacket that no longer fit properly. "Yes. I have victim impact testimony to deliver." He nodded, accepting this as part of the consequences he'd earned. As he walked toward the courthouse entrance, I felt the weight of 8 years of marriage finally lifting from my shoulders. The man disappearing through those doors was a stranger who'd worn Joshua's face while systematically planning my destruction. Inside the courtroom, I took my seat in the front row and watched as the legal process that had consumed months of my life reached its conclusion. The prosecutor outlined the charges: identity theft, bank fraud, forgery, elder abuse, conspiracy, each count representing a deliberate choice Joshua had made to prioritize his own desires over my safety and financial security. When called to deliver my victim impact statement, I stood and faced the judge with the same confidence I'd developed during 8 years of investigating insurance fraud. "Your Honor, the defendant didn't just steal money or forge signatures. He systematically planned to erase my existence, steal my family's legacy, and build his new life on the foundation of my destruction. While I lay unconscious after surgery, he brought his pregnant girlfriend to my hospital room and discussed my potential death as a convenient solution to his moral failures. I spoke for 10 minutes, detailing not just the financial crimes but the emotional manipulation, the lies told to friends and family, and the calculated way he'd used my trust and vulnerability against me. When I finished, the courtroom was silent except for the sound of Joshua's quiet sobbing. Judge Patricia Martinez, no relation to Joshua, despite the shared surname, delivered a sentence that reflected the seriousness of his crimes. 8 years in federal prison, full restitution of all stolen funds plus damages, and 5 years of supervised probation upon release. He would serve his time at a federal facility 3 hours away, ensuring that Chelsea's visits would be expensive and difficult even if she chose to maintain their relationship. As the bailiff led Joshua away in handcuffs, I felt a sense of completion I hadn't expected. The man who'd planned my death as a solution to his problems had instead engineered the complete destruction of his own life and future. Walking out of that courthouse, I realized that Joshua's betrayal had been the catalyst for the most important discoveries of my adult life. I'd learned that I was stronger, smarter, and more resilient than I'd ever imagined. My grandmother's house was truly mine again, my financial future was secure, and I had a clear understanding of my own worth that no one could manipulate or destroy. The woman who'd lain unconscious in that hospital bed, listening to people discuss her death as a convenient solution, had been transformed into someone who would never again allow anyone to mistake her kindness for weakness or her trust for stupidity. Justice had been served, But more importantly, I had been served the opportunity to rebuild my life on a foundation of truth, strength, and self-respect that would protect me for whatever challenges lay ahead. If this story of perfect justice had you captivated, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when she revealed, "I heard every word you said while I was unconscious." The look on Joshua's face must have been priceless. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more incredible stories of women fighting back. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.
My name is Haley Thompson, and at 27, I'm living my dream as a senior automotive engineer with my own consulting firm. But 5 years ago, my parents betrayed me by selling my most prized possession, my grandfather's 1967 Mustang Fastback, to fund my spoiled sister's whims. The look on their faces when I pulled into their driveway with that same car fully restored? Priceless. Before I get into this crazy story, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had something precious taken from you. Trust me, you'll want to see how I turn this heartbreak into the best revenge success story. My love affair with cars began when I was just 7 years old. My grandfather, Robert Thompson, was a mechanical genius who spent his weekends in his garage, always tinkering with some vintage beauty. While other little girls were playing with dolls, I was handing tools to Grandpa Rob and soaking up every word as he explained how engines worked, what made a carburetor tick, and why certain cars were engineering marvels. "Haley girl," he'd say, wiping grease from his weathered hands, "cars aren't just machines. They're stories on wheels. Every ding, every repair, every mile, they all tell you something about the journey." His garage was my classroom, and under that metal roof, I learned more than just mechanics. I learned patience, problem solving, and the satisfaction of bringing something back to life with your own 2 hands. My parents never really understood this connection. They'd smile politely when I'd come home covered in grease, but the pride in their eyes was always reserved for my younger sister, Megan. Megan was everything I wasn't: conventionally pretty, socially adept, and interested in things my parents found easier to understand. While I was calculating gear ratios, she was calculating social hierarchies. Don't get me wrong, I loved my sister, but even as kids, we inhabited different universes. On my 13th birthday, everything changed. Grandpa Rob took me to the back of his garage and pulled a tarp off a rusted, dented frame that barely resembled a car. "Know what this is?" he asked, eyes twinkling. Even in that condition, I recognized the distinctive lines. 1967 Mustang Fastback, I breathed, running my hand along the faded paint. Smart girl. She needs a lot of love, but she's got good bones. He handed me the key, just a simple piece of metal, but it felt like gold in my palm. "When you turn 16, she's yours. But only if we restore her together. Deal?" I couldn't believe it. The Mustang was legendary, the kind of car that made people stop and stare, the kind that rumbled with American muscle car history. And Grandpa was offering it to me. Not to my dad. Not to any of my cousins. To me. For the next 2 years, every weekend was dedicated to that car. We sourced original parts from junkyards and specialty shops. Grandpa taught me to weld, to sand, to prime. We rebuilt the engine piece by piece. My hands grew calloused, my knowledge expanded, and that car slowly transformed from a rusted shell into something magnificent. My parents would occasionally peek into the garage, nod politely, then return to whatever activity Megan was involved in, usually something that required expensive clothing, lessons, or travel. I noticed, but I didn't care. I had Grandpa Rob and the Mustang. Then, 3 months before my 16th birthday, Grandpa had a massive stroke. One minute he was showing me how to install the Mustang's new carburetor, the next he was being rushed to the hospital. He never regained consciousness. 2 weeks later, we buried the man who had shown me what passion truly meant. The day after the funeral, my father handed me an envelope. "He wanted you to have this," Dad said awkwardly. Inside was a handwritten note and the title to the Mustang, legally transferred to my name. The note read simply, "Haley girl, finish what we started. Every mile you drive in her is a mile I'm riding shotgun with you. Love, Grandpa." I sobbed for hours, clutching that piece of paper. The Mustang wasn't just a car anymore, it was my last connection to the person who had truly seen me, who had valued what made me different. The restoration wasn't complete, but I was determined to finish it before college. I took after-school jobs to pay for parts. I watched tutorial videos when I got stuck. I even recruited a couple of guys from the high school auto shop class to help with the heavy lifting. By the summer before my senior year, the Mustang was about 80% complete. The engine ran, though it needed fine-tuning. The body was painted a gorgeous vintage blue. The interior still needed work, but I could see the finish line. That car represented everything to me: my relationship with my grandfather, my own determination and skill, and my future. I planned to drive it to college, where I would study automotive engineering. In my mind, the Mustang was both my past and my future. What I didn't know was that my sister had plans of her own, plans that would set us on a collision course, with the Mustang caught in the middle. The letter from Stanford University's School of Engineering arrived on a sweltering July afternoon. I'd been accepted with a partial scholarship, enough to make attendance possible, but not enough to cover everything. Still, I was ecstatic. This was my dream school, the first step toward a career designing the cars of the future. My parents congratulated me with tight smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. Later that night, I overheard them discussing finances in hushed tones. "We just don't have enough for both girls," my mother whispered. The Stanford tuition, even with Haley's scholarship, plus Megan's cheerleading camp and her junior year expenses. "We'll figure it out," my father assured her. "We always do." I should have recognized the warning signs, but I was too caught up in my excitement about Stanford and too focused on finishing the Mustang's restoration before leaving for college. I picked up extra shifts at the local auto parts store, saving every penny for the vintage leather upholstery I'd found for the seats. Meanwhile, Megan had been selected for an elite cheerleading camp in Texas, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, according to my parents. The camp cost nearly $5,000, not including the new uniforms, travel expenses, and necessary shopping trips for appropriate clothing. On top of that, Megan had started campaigning for a brand new Jeep Wrangler for her 16th birthday, which was coming up in the fall. "Everyone in my squad has their own car," she complained over dinner one night. "I can't keep having Mom drive me to practices. It's humiliating." I rolled my eyes but kept quiet. I was used to Megan's dramatics and my parents' indulgence. The day everything changed started normally enough. I worked a morning shift at the auto parts store, then headed to my friend Tyler's house to use his garage lift for some underbody work on the Mustang. I'd been keeping the car there for the past few weeks since Tyler had better tools. When I got home around 7 p.m., my parents and Megan were sitting in the living room, an unusual tableau of calm that immediately set off alarm bells in my head. "What's going on?" I asked, dropping my backpack by the door. My father cleared his throat. "Haley, we need to talk about college expenses." "I know it's tight," I said quickly. "I'm applying for more scholarships, and I can work part-time while I'm at school." "That won't be necessary," my mother cut in with a strange smile. "We've found a solution." "We sold the Mustang," my father announced flatly. The words didn't make sense at first. "Sold the Mustang? My Mustang? The one in Tyler's garage? What are you talking about?" I demanded, my voice rising. "You can't sell the Mustang. It's mine. Grandpa left it to me. I have the title." "The title that's kept in our safe," my father corrected. "You're a minor, Haley. Legally, we have custody of your property until you're 18. The room seemed to tilt sideways. "You went to Tyler's and took my car?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "We explained the situation to Tyler's parents," my mother said defensively. "They understood completely." "Who did you sell it to? How much did you get?" I was shouting now, tears streaming down my face. "A collector from Oklahoma. He gave us $15,000 cash, which was very generous considering the car isn't even finished." I nearly choked. $15,000? That car is worth 3 times that much when restored. The engine alone is worth whatever someone will pay for it, my father interrupted firmly. "This way, we can cover the remainder of your Stanford tuition, Megan's camp, and put a down payment on a sensible used car for her." I turned to look at my sister, who had remained suspiciously quiet throughout this exchange. She had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable, but I caught the satisfied gleam in her eye. "You knew about this," I said quietly. "You knew they were selling my car so you could go to cheer camp and get your own car." "It's not like you were even driving it," Megan defended. "It was just sitting in Tyler's garage collecting dust. Besides, you're going to college across the country. What were you going to do, drive it to California?" "Yes!" I screamed. That was exactly my plan. To finish restoring MY car, the car MY grandfather left to me, and drive it to college. The car that I've poured 3 years of work into. "Haley, that's enough," my father said sternly. "What's done is done. The car is gone. The buyer picked it up this morning." This morning, while I was working my shift, saving money for parts, my parents had snuck behind my back and sold my most precious possession. "How could you do this?" I whispered, my voice breaking. "That was all I had left of Grandpa." "Don't be so dramatic," my mother sighed. "It was just a car, and not even a functional one at that. This way, everyone gets what they need. You get to go to Stanford without crushing student loans, and Megan gets what she wants," I finished bitterly. Like always. I turned and walked out of the house, ignoring their calls to come back. I spent that night at Tyler's, crying until I had no tears left. The empty space in his garage where the Mustang had been parked was a physical representation of the hole in my heart. The next morning, I made 3 decisions that would change the course of my life. First, I would go to Stanford as planned, but I would not accept a single penny from my parents. I would take out loans, find scholarships, work multiple jobs if necessary. Second, I would become so successful in my field that one day I could buy back the Mustang, or one just like it, without their help. And third, I would never forgive them for what they had done. I returned home long enough to pack my essential belongings. As I was loading boxes into Tyler's truck, my father approached with a check. "Your portion of the car money," he explained, holding it out to me. $5,000 toward your tuition." I looked at the check, then back at my father's face. Without a word, I tore the check into tiny pieces and let them flutter to the driveway. "Haley," he called after me as I climbed into Tyler's truck. "Don't be foolish. You need this money." "No," I said with a calmness I didn't feel. What I needed was for my parents to respect what was mine. What I needed was the one thing Grandpa left me. What I needed was for you to see me, just once, the way you see Megan. I closed the door and nodded to Tyler to drive. In the rearview mirror, I watched my father standing in the driveway, surrounded by the confetti of his torn check, growing smaller and smaller until he disappeared completely. Stanford University's campus sprawled before me like something from a dream. Spanish colonial buildings with terracotta roofs, palm trees swaying in the California breeze, and the promise of a fresh start. I arrived with 6 suitcases, 3 maxed-out credit cards, and a determination that burned hotter than the engine I'd lovingly rebuilt for the Mustang. The first week of classes, I met with the financial aid office and laid out my situation. I needed to be completely self-sufficient. The counselor looked skeptical when I explained that I wouldn't be accepting any parental contributions, but she helped me find additional scholarships and work-study opportunities. It wouldn't be enough, but it was a start. Within a month, I had 3 jobs: morning shifts at a campus coffee shop, weekend work at a local garage, and tutoring engineering students in the evenings. I slept 4 hours a night and subsisted on ramen and coffee. But with every paycheck, every exhausted night spent studying, I felt a fierce pride. This was my life now, built with my own hands, just like I'd been building that car. During my first semester's automotive design seminar, I met Professor Jessica Reed, a former lead engineer at Tesla who had helped design their revolutionary battery systems. After class one day, she stopped me as I was packing up my books. "Thompson, right?" she asked, peering at me over stylish glasses. "Your analysis of the combustion efficiency problem was impressive." "Thank you, Professor," I said, trying not to show how much the compliment meant to me. "Do you have industry experience? Your understanding of practical applications is unusual for a freshman." I hesitated, then told her about the Mustang, how my grandfather had taught me to rebuild engines, how I'd spent 3 years restoring the car, and how it had been sold without my consent. Professor Reed listened without interruption, then nodded. "Their loss," she said simply. "My research team has an opening for an undergraduate assistant. The pay is decent, and the experience will be valuable. Interested?" That was the beginning of my real education. Under Professor Reed's mentorship, I thrived. My project work focused on improving efficiency in hybrid engine systems, a perfect blend of classic combustion mechanics and cutting-edge technology. By my junior year, we had developed a modification that improved fuel efficiency by 22% without sacrificing performance. Meanwhile, contact with my family dwindled to near nothing. I went home that first Thanksgiving only to find that Megan was driving a nearly new Jeep Wrangler, not the sensible used car my parents had initially described. She spent the entire weekend talking about her popularity at school, while my parents asked superficial questions about Stanford that never touched on my actual accomplishments. I didn't go home for Christmas, or spring break, or the following summer. My mother called occasionally, her voice always tinged with a forced cheerfulness that grated on my nerves. "We miss you, honey," she'd say. "Dad and I were thinking maybe we could fly out to visit you." "I'm busy," I'd reply. Midterms. Research. Work. Always an excuse, always true enough to be believable. My father's calls were less frequent and more awkward. "Your mother worries about you," he'd say, as if his own concern was too painful to acknowledge directly. I never asked about the Mustang. I couldn't bear to know where it was or what had happened to it. In my mind, it existed in a suspended state, neither mine nor truly gone. By senior year, the prototype hybrid system Professor Reed and I had developed caught the attention of several major automotive companies. Our patent application was pending, and job offers started rolling in. I accepted a position with Rivian, the electric adventure vehicle company, at their research facility in Michigan. The starting salary made my student loan debt seem manageable, and the work aligned perfectly with my interests. At graduation, I scanned the crowd out of habit, not expecting to see my family. I'd sent them an announcement but told them not to come. I was too busy with the ceremony and moving preparations to entertain visitors, I'd explained in the email. So I was surprised to spot my parents in the audience, dressed uncomfortably in their Sunday best, my father's hand raised in a tentative wave when our eyes met. Megan wasn't with them. After the ceremony, we engaged in the most painful small talk I'd ever experienced. They complimented my honors courts and asked about my new job. I answered politely but briefly. When my father reached to hug me goodbye, I allowed it but didn't return the embrace. "We're proud of you, Haley," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know you don't believe that, but we are." "Thanks for coming," I replied, stepping back. "I have to go. My friends are waiting to help me pack up my apartment." That was the last time I saw them in person for nearly 3 years. At Rivian, I threw myself into my work with the same intensity I'd once devoted to the Mustang. My hybrid engine technology was incorporated into their new line of vehicles, earning me a promotion and a significant bonus when the patent was finally approved. By 25, I was leading my own research team. By 26, I had enough capital and industry connections to launch Thompson Automotive Consulting. The distance, both geographical and emotional, between my family and me had solidified into something that felt permanent. Occasional phone calls on birthdays and holidays maintained the thinnest veneer of connection. From these conversations, I gleaned snippets of information. My father was still at the same company, but worried about downsizing. My mother had developed some health issues she vaguely described as nothing serious. Megan had dropped out of college to pursue influencer status, with limited success. I listened and made appropriate noises of concern, but their problems felt like stories from a book I'd read long ago, familiar, but not quite real. With my growing financial success came the ability to indulge my passion again. I purchased a spacious garage in a Detroit suburb and began collecting classic cars in need of restoration. A '69 Camaro, a '73 Corvette Stingray, a '65 Shelby Cobra replica. Each one filled a small part of the void left by the Mustang, but none quite captured its meaning. Then one night, scrolling through an online forum for classic car enthusiasts, I saw a post that stopped my heart. 1967 Mustang Fastback, blue, partially restored, engine rebuilt but needs work. Previous owner claims it was restored by his granddaughter before he bought it. Attached was a single photo, grainy and dark, but unmistakable. The distinctive paint color I'd selected. The chrome trim pieces we'd spent months tracking down. The custom wheels my grandfather had insisted were the only ones worthy of the car. My hands shaking, I messaged the poster. "Where's this car now? Who owns it?" The response came hours later. Been through a few owners. Last I heard, it was sold to a junkyard in Illinois after an accident damaged the front end. Shame. Was a beauty in progress. I hired a private investigator the next day. It cost me $10,000 and took 3 months, but they found it, my Mustang, sitting in a junkyard outside Chicago. Its once beautiful blue paint faded and rusted, the front crumpled from an impact with what appeared to be a tree. The engine had been stripped for parts. The junkyard owner wanted $3,000 for it, highway robbery for what was essentially a shell, but a bargain for what it meant to me. I paid without negotiation and had it transported to my garage in Michigan. When the flatbed truck delivered what remained of my grandfather's legacy, I stood in silence for a long time, just looking at it. Then I placed my hand on the damaged hood, feeling the cold metal beneath my palm. "I found you," I whispered. "And this time, no one's taking you away from me." I documented every step of the restoration process on social media. Reunited, a '67 Mustang's journey home, gained a surprising following. Other car enthusiasts, restoration specialists, and people who simply appreciated the story of reclaiming something lost. I didn't share all the details of how the car had been taken from me, but I hinted at enough that followers understood this was more than just another project. What I didn't reveal on those posts was my ultimate plan for the Mustang once it was restored, a plan that would bring my long separation from my family to a dramatic end. 2 years into my career at Rivian, the company's leadership recognized the potential of the hybrid engine system I'd helped develop. They assigned me to lead a special project team focused on integrating this technology into their next generation of vehicles. My team consisted of 12 engineers, each specializing in different aspects of automotive design, from aerodynamics to materials science, but I was the youngest department head by nearly a decade. "Thompson," my director said when he offered me the position, "you've got an old soul when it comes to engines. You understand both where we've been and where we're going." That's rare. I thought of my grandfather and wished he could have heard those words. Leading the project taught me more than just technical skills. I learned to manage people, to navigate corporate politics, and to present complex ideas to executives who cared more about profit margins than engineering elegance. The pressure was immense, but so was the satisfaction when our prototype exceeded performance expectations. The breakthrough came during a late-night testing session. We'd been struggling with heat management in the hybrid system. The transition between electric and combustion power created temperature spikes that affected overall efficiency. I was alone in the lab, reviewing thermal imaging data for the 100th time, when I remembered something my grandfather had shown me on the Mustang. "Engines breathe, Haley girl," he'd explained, pointing to the intake manifold. "And just like people, they perform best when they breathe rhythmically." That simple insight led to a radical redesign of the power transition timing. Instead of treating the electric and combustion components as separate systems that handed off to each other, we created a pulsed integration that allowed them to work in a synchronized rhythm. The result was a 34% increase in efficiency and a smoother performance than anything currently on the market. When we unveiled the technology at the Detroit Auto Show, industry publications called it revolutionary. 3 months later, I filed the patent application with Rivian's backing. 6 months after that, licensing inquiries started coming in from other manufacturers. The royalties from the patent transformed my financial situation overnight. My first check was enough to pay off my remaining student loans and put a down payment on a modest house with the large garage I'd always dreamed of. The second check allowed me to quit Rivian and establish Thompson Automotive Consulting. Starting my own firm was terrifying and exhilarating. I leased a small office space in a Detroit suburb, hired an administrative assistant named Zoe who quickly became indispensable, and began reaching out to contacts I'd made in the industry. My pitch was simple. I offered specialized consultation on efficiency optimization, particularly for companies developing hybrid or transitional technologies. My first client was a Japanese motorcycle manufacturer looking to develop a hybrid sport bike. The second was a German luxury car company interested in adapting my patented system for their performance line. By the end of my first year as an entrepreneur, I had 6 major clients and had hired 3 additional engineers to help manage the workload. Success brought unexpected attention. Automotive Engineering Monthly featured me in their 30 Under 30 issue. I was invited to speak at industry conferences and university engineering programs. A particularly surreal moment came when Stanford asked me to give a guest lecture to the same program I'd graduated from just a few years earlier. After one such speaking engagement, I was approached by a silver-haired man in an impeccable suit who introduced himself as Martin Weiss, CEO of Classic Revolution, a company known for creating modern electric versions of classic cars. "Ms. Thompson," he said, shaking my hand firmly, "your work on hybrid systems is impressive, but what caught my attention was your obvious passion for classic automobiles. The examples you used in your presentation, particularly that '67 Mustang, showed real knowledge." I smiled, thinking of the partially restored Mustang waiting in my garage. "I grew up with those cars, Mr. Weiss. My grandfather taught me everything I know about engines by restoring classics." "Then perhaps you'd be interested in a partnership. We're looking to develop a new line that honors the spirit of American muscle cars while incorporating cutting-edge hybrid technology. Your expertise in both worlds would be invaluable." The collaboration with Classic Revolution expanded my business beyond consultation into actual product development. We created a prototype system that could be retrofitted into classic car bodies, providing modern performance and efficiency while maintaining the distinctive feel and sound that collectors cherished. As my professional reputation grew, so did my personal collection of restoration projects. The garage attached to my house quickly proved inadequate, so I purchased an old body shop on the outskirts of Detroit, 5,000 square feet of space with lifts, specialized tools, and room for up to 8 vehicles. Weekends and evenings found me there, often working alone, restoring classics one by one. Each car taught me something new, but they were all preludes to the project that truly mattered, the Mustang. I approached its restoration differently than my other projects. This wasn't just about mechanical perfection or historical accuracy, it was about reclaiming a piece of my history. I hunted down original parts, often paying premium prices. I consulted with Mustang specialists when I encountered challenges. I even tracked down the same type of vintage leather my grandfather and I had planned to use for the seats. The engine was the greatest challenge. The original had been stripped for parts, leaving little more than the block. I considered installing one of my hybrid systems. It would have been poetically fitting, but ultimately decided to rebuild it to the original specifications. This car wasn't about showcasing my professional accomplishments. It was about honoring the legacy my grandfather had entrusted to me. The restoration took 18 months of dedicated work. I documented every step on social media, where my account had grown to over 200,000 followers. I didn't share the full story, just that the car had once belonged to my grandfather, had been sold, and that I'd spent years tracking it down. The comments were full of encouragement and questions about when I'd reveal the completed project. Soon, I always replied, "There's one more journey this car needs to make first." That journey's destination became clear when I received a phone call from my father one Sunday evening, the first time he'd called directly in nearly 2 years. "Haley," he said, his voice sounding older and more tired than I remembered, "I know we don't talk much, but I thought you should know what's happening here." He explained that his company had finally gone through with the long-threatened downsizing, eliminating his middle management position after 26 years. At 58, he was struggling to find comparable work. Meanwhile, my mother's nothing serious health issues had developed into rheumatoid arthritis, requiring expensive medication that their insurance only partially covered. "We've had to sell the house," he said, the words clearly painful for him. "We're moving into a condo next month. Much smaller, but it's what we can afford now." I listened, feeling a complicated mix of sympathy and lingering resentment. "What about Megan?" I asked. "Is she helping?" My father's silence spoke volumes before he finally answered. "Megan's got her own situation. She's back living at home, actually. Her influencer career didn't. Well, she's between jobs right now." Translation: Megan was still being supported by my parents, even as they faced financial ruin. "I'm sorry to hear about all this," I said carefully. "It sounds like a difficult time." "We'll manage," he replied with forced brightness. "We always do. But it would be good to see you, Haley. It's been too long." After we hung up, I sat in my garage, staring at the now gleaming Mustang. The restoration was complete. The car was actually better than it had been when my parents sold it, better even than what my grandfather and I had originally planned. Every curve, every component, every stitch in the leather seats was perfect. I ran my hand along the hood, feeling the cool, smooth metal beneath my palm. "What do you think, Grandpa?" I asked aloud. "Is it time to go home?" The next day, I called my father back and told him I'd be visiting in 2 weeks. I didn't mention the Mustang. Some returns are better when they're a surprise. My parents' financial situation was worse than my father had admitted over the phone. As I dug deeper through careful questions during our occasional calls, the full picture emerged. Not only had Dad lost his job, but their savings had been severely depleted by a combination of my mother's medical expenses and Megan's constant financial needs. They had been forced to sell the family home, the 4-bedroom colonial where I'd grown up, and downsize to a 2-bedroom condo in a less desirable neighborhood. The process had been rushed, forcing them to sell furniture and belongings that wouldn't fit in the smaller space. Many of these items had been drastically undervalued in their haste to liquidate. "Your mother's having a hard time adjusting," my father confided during one call. "She keeps talking about the garden she had to leave behind." The garden had been my mother's pride and joy. Carefully cultivated roses, a small vegetable patch, and flowering trees she'd planted when each of us was born. Mine was a cherry tree that bloomed spectacularly each spring. Megan's was a dogwood with delicate white flowers. Both were now the property of strangers. Mom's health issues had progressed beyond the initial diagnosis. The rheumatoid arthritis affected her hands severely, making it difficult for her to perform everyday tasks. The medication that best controlled her symptoms cost $600 per month after insurance, an expense they could barely manage. "But we're making it work," Dad insisted, his voice strained with forced optimism. "The condo is cozy, and it's less maintenance. And your mother's trying some alternative therapies that might help reduce the medication costs." What he didn't say, what I had to piece together from comments and context, was that they were behind on payments for nearly everything: the mortgage on the new condo, medical bills, utilities. They were slowly drowning in debt, too proud to ask for help but too overwhelmed to find a solution. Meanwhile, Megan had returned home after her influencer career failed to materialize. She had dropped out of college 3 credits short of graduation to pursue social media fame, convinced that her cheerleading background and personal style would translate into sponsorships and opportunities. When that plan collapsed, she'd cycled through a series of retail jobs, never keeping any position for more than a few months. Now she was living in the 2nd bedroom of my parents' condo, supposedly saving money for her own place, but, from what I could gather, contributing little to the household expenses. "Your sister's going through a tough time," my mother said defensively when I asked about Megan's situation. "She's trying to find herself." At 25? I couldn't help responding. "While you and Dad are selling your possessions to make ends meet?" "Everyone's journey is different, Haley," my mother replied with that familiar tone, the one that had always suggested Megan needed more understanding, more patience, more support than I did. My best friend from college, Alex Chin, now a financial advisor in Chicago, listened as I vented my frustration during one of our weekly video calls. They're still enabling her, I fumed, pacing across my living room with my phone. Even when they literally can't afford it. And she's letting them. Who does that? Alex's face on my screen remained thoughtful. Someone who's never had to face consequences, he said finally. Look, I know you're still angry about the car. This isn't about the car, I interrupted, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. Maybe not entirely, Alex conceded. But it is about patterns that started a long time ago. Your parents always treated you and Megan differently. They expected more from you and gave more to her. That dynamic doesn't just disappear. So, what am I supposed to do? Just watch them go bankrupt supporting my almost 30-year-old sister. Alex was quiet for a moment. What do you want to do, Haley? Not what you think you should do, but what do you actually want? I stopped pacing and sank onto my couch. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to help them, they're my parents, and despite everything, I don't want them to suffer. But another part is still hurt, Alex finished for me. And maybe afraid that helping them financially means forgiving what they did. Is that petty? I asked. To still be hung up on something that happened when I was 17? It's not about the car itself, Alex said gently. It's about what it represented. They took something that was legally and emotionally yours and gave the benefits to your sister. That's a pretty fundamental breach of trust. I nodded, feeling the familiar ache whenever I thought about that day. Coming home to find the Mustang gone, sold without my knowledge or consent. But here's something to consider, Alex continued. Forgiveness doesn't have to be about them. It can be about freeing yourself from carrying this weight. And helping doesn't have to mean enabling the same patterns. That conversation stayed with me as I completed the final touches on the Mustang's restoration. The car was now perfect, better than new, with its original character intact, but with subtle modern improvements to the brakes and electrical system. The vintage blue paint gleamed under the garage lights, and the engine purred with a satisfying rumble that I knew would have made my grandfather proud. As I polished the chrome trim one final time, I made my decision. I would go home, not just for a brief visit, but to truly confront the past. And I would bring the Mustang with me. I called my father the next day. Dad, I said when he answered, I'm coming home for a week. I think we need to talk. Really talk about everything that's happening with you and Mom. His surprise was evident in his silence before he finally responded. We'd like that, Haley. It's been too long. I'll drive down next weekend, I said, looking at the Mustang. There's something I want to show you. I spent the next few days preparing for the journey. I had the Mustang thoroughly checked by a trusted mechanic, packed a small suitcase, and organized my work schedule to allow for a full week away. I also contacted several realtors in my hometown, asking them to send information on available properties, smaller homes with good accessibility features that might suit my parents' needs. The morning of my departure, I stood in my garage looking at the Mustang, its tank full, ready for the 300-mile journey to my hometown. This car had already traveled so far from my grandfather's garage to mine, from neglected project to prized possession, from symbol of betrayal to emblem of my success. Now it would carry me back to face the family who had taken it from me, who had failed to see its value, both monetary and emotional, until it was too late. I ran my hand along the fender, feeling the smooth, cool metal beneath my palm. Let's go show them what they missed, old girl, I whispered, then climbed behind the wheel and fired up the engine. As I pulled out of my driveway, the rumble of the V8 vibrating through the steering wheel, I couldn't help smiling at the thought of my parents' faces when I pulled up in the car they had sold for a fraction of its worth, the car that now, like me, had been transformed into something more valuable than they could have imagined. The journey back to my hometown took 8 hours, longer than necessary, because I avoided the interstate when possible, preferring the scenic routes where the Mustang could truly shine. Every small town I passed through, people turned to look at the car, some offering thumbs up or appreciative nods. At gas stations, I fielded the inevitable questions. What year? How long did the restoration take? Is that the original engine? I answered politely but briefly, not sharing the deeper story. That revelation was reserved for the people waiting at the end of my journey. As familiar landmarks began to appear, I felt a strange mixture of nostalgia and anxiety. The diner where my family used to have Sunday breakfast. The high school where I'd been the odd girl who preferred shop class to cheerleading. The park where my grandfather had sometimes taken me to feed ducks when I was very young. I followed my GPS to my parents' new address. A beige condo building in a development that hadn't existed when I lived here. It looked bland and impersonal, a stark contrast to our old family home with its wraparound porch and maple trees in the front yard. Taking a deep breath, I pulled the Mustang into a visitor's parking space and cut the engine. For a moment, I sat in silence, my hands still resting on the steering wheel, gathering my courage. "We're here, Grandpa," I whispered. Then I grabbed my weekend bag from the passenger seat and headed for Building 3, Unit 204. My father opened the door before I could knock. He must have been watching from the window. He looked older than I remembered, his hair now completely gray, new lines etched around his eyes and mouth, his shoulders slightly stooped. But his eyes lit up when he saw me, and for a second, I glimpsed the dad who had once pushed me on swings and taught me to ride a bike. "Haley," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're really here." Before I could respond, he pulled me into an awkward hug. I allowed it, even returning it briefly before stepping back. "It's good to see you, Dad," I said, surprised to find I meant it. He ushered me inside. The condo was indeed small, a combined living and dining area, a galley kitchen visible through a pass-through, and a hallway that presumably led to the bedrooms. The furniture was a mix of pieces I recognized from our old house, looking oversized in the smaller space, and newer, cheaper items probably purchased to fill gaps. My mother rose from an armchair as I entered. Like my father, she had aged visibly, her hair thinner, her face more drawn. But the most noticeable change was in her hands, which were slightly swollen and bent at the joints. She wore a simple gold wedding band, but her fingers had become too misshapen for the diamond engagement ring I remembered. "Haley," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "My beautiful girl." I hugged her more genuinely than I had my father, careful not to squeeze too tightly. "Hi, Mom. How are you feeling?" "Oh, good days and bad days," she said with forced brightness. "Today is definitely a good day now that you're here." We engaged in careful small talk as I settled in, discussions about my drive down, the weather, my mother's new medication regimen. They asked polite questions about my work, though I could tell they didn't fully understand what I did. Neither mentioned the Mustang, and I didn't volunteer that information. "Not yet. Is Megan here?" I asked finally, noticing the conspicuous absence of my sister. My parents exchanged a glance loaded with meaning I couldn't quite interpret. "She's out with friends," my father said. "She should be back for dinner. We're ordering from Antonio's, your favorite pizza place. It's still there, though Antonio Jr. runs it now." I nodded, remembering the thin-crust pepperoni pizzas that had been a special treat in my childhood. "Sounds good." My mother gave me a tour of their new home, a process that took all of 5 minutes given its size. The master bedroom barely fit their queen-sized bed and a single dresser. The second bedroom, where Megan was staying, was a chaos of clothing, makeup, and social media equipment, a ring light, a tripod, various backdrops. The bathroom was small, but had been modified with grab bars for my mother's safety. "It's cozy," my mother said with that same forced cheerfulness. "And the association takes care of all the outdoor maintenance, which is a blessing with my hands the way they are." I nodded, noting the lack of personal touches that had made our old house a home, the family photos that had lined the staircase, my mother's collection of blown glass figurines, the comfortable clutter of a life well lived. This place felt temporary, like an extended stay hotel rather than a home. As afternoon turned to evening, I helped my father set the table while my mother rested. This gave us a rare moment alone together. "Dad," I said quietly, arranging napkins at each place setting, "why didn't you call me sooner about all this? About Mom's health, about losing your job?" He kept his eyes on the plates he was setting out. "You made it pretty clear you wanted distance from us, Haley. And after what happened with the car." He trailed off, then sighed. "We didn't feel we had the right to ask for your help." I was formulating a response when the front door burst open and Megan blew in like a hurricane. At 25, my sister was still conventionally beautiful, though her looks now had a harder edge, too much makeup, hair bleached a shade of blonde that didn't occur in nature, clothing that seemed calculated for maximum social media impact. She stopped short when she saw me, her expression cycling rapidly through surprise, wariness, and finally a brittle smile. "Well, look who finally remembered she has a family," she said, dropping her oversized purse on the couch. "The prodigal genius returns." "Megan," my father said with a warning tone. "We talked about this." My sister rolled her eyes, but approached to give me a quick, perfunctory hug that smelled of expensive perfume. "Sorry." "Hi, Haley. You look corporate." I glanced down at my simple jeans and sweater. "Thanks, I think. You look exactly the same." An uncomfortable silence fell, broken by the arrival of the pizza delivery. We gathered around the small dining table, the conversation stilted and superficial. My parents asked safe questions about my work, my house in Michigan, whether I was seeing anyone I wasn't. Megan talked at length about her latest business idea, a lifestyle coaching service for young women, which sounded suspiciously like another attempt to monetize her non-existent influencer status. As we finished eating, I decided it was time. "I brought something to show you," I said, reaching for my phone. "Something I've been working on for the past couple of years." I pulled up the photo gallery dedicated to the Mustang's restoration and handed the phone to my father. "Swipe through these." His brow furrowed in confusion as he looked at the first image, the Mustang as I'd found it in the junkyard, damaged and rusted. Then his expression changed to disbelief as he swiped through the progression of photos showing the car's transformation back to glory. "Is this?" he began, his voice trailing off. "Grandpa's Mustang," I confirmed. "The one you sold when I was 17. I tracked it down about 2 years ago." My mother leaned over to look at the photos, her hand rising to cover her mouth. "Oh my goodness," she whispered. "You found it." "What was left of it," I said, keeping my voice neutral despite the emotion welling in my chest. "It had been through several owners. The last one crashed it into a tree and abandoned it at a junkyard in Illinois. I bought it back and restored it again." My father looked up from the phone, his eyes suspiciously bright. "These photos are incredible. The car looks better than new." "It is better than new," I said. "And it's outside if you want to see it in person." The shock on their faces might have been comical under different circumstances. "You drove it here?" my father asked incredulously. "It's here right now?" I nodded, standing up from the table. "Come see." All three of them followed me outside to the visitor parking area where the Mustang sat gleaming under the early evening light, its vintage blue paint catching the golden hues of sunset. My father approached it slowly, almost reverently, circling the car with the careful eye of someone who appreciates fine craftsmanship. "Haley," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion, "this is extraordinary. The work you've done." He trailed off, shaking his head in amazement. My mother was more direct. "I'm so sorry," she said simply, tears tracking down her cheeks. "We should never have sold it. We didn't understand what it meant to you." Megan hung back, her expression unreadable. I wasn't sure what I had expected from her, perhaps more of the dismissive attitude she'd shown inside, but her silence was somehow more unsettling. "Would you like to see the engine?" I asked my father, popping the hood. He peered inside, visibly impressed by the immaculate restoration. "You rebuilt this yourself?" "From scratch." "Most of it," I confirmed. Some parts one had to source from specialists, but the assembly was all me. "Your grandfather would be so proud," he said quietly. Then, to my surprise, he began to cry, not just tears, but actual sobs that shook his shoulders. I stood awkwardly, unsure how to respond to this display of emotion from my stoic father. After a moment, I reached out and placed my hand on his arm. "Dad," I said gently, "would you like to take it for a drive?" He looked up, wiping his eyes with embarrassment. "Really? You'd let me drive it?" "Keys are in the ignition," I said, stepping back. "Just you and me, like when you taught me to drive in the high school parking lot." My father slid into the driver's seat with reverence, his hands caressing the steering wheel. I walked around to the passenger side and got in beside him. As he turned the key, the engine roared to life, its deep rumble seeming to vibrate through our bodies. Remember to give it a little extra gas when you shift into second, I advised as he pulled carefully out of the parking space. The clutch grabs high. We drove in silence for several minutes, my father growing more comfortable with the car's power and handling. Finally, on a straight stretch of road outside town, he spoke. I've regretted selling this car every day since we did it, he said, eyes fixed on the road ahead. Not just because of how it hurt you, though that's been hard enough to live with, but because I let myself be pressured into making a decision I knew was wrong. Pressured by who? I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. By your mother, partly. She never understood why the car mattered so much to you. By financial stress, certainly. He paused. And by Megan. She was very insistent about needing money for her activities, her car, her social standing. And now? I prompted when he fell silent. Now we're paying the price for a lifetime of those decisions, he said heavily. For always giving Megan what she wanted instead of what she needed. For not appreciating your independence and drive. For selling a car that would now be worth, he broke off, shaking his head. About $120,000 in this condition, I supplied. Maybe more to the right buyer. He whistled low. We sold it for $15,000 and thought we were being clever. It wasn't about the money, I said. It was never about the money, Dad. It was about respect. About honoring what Grandpa wanted for me. About asking before taking something that wasn't yours to take. I know that now, he said quietly. Too late, but I know it. When we returned to the condo, my mother was waiting anxiously in the parking lot. Megan had disappeared back inside. How was it? Mom asked as Dad reluctantly turned off the engine. Like driving a piece of history, he replied, patting the dashboard affectionately before getting out. Haley's done something remarkable here. We returned inside to find Megan on the couch, scrolling through her phone with affected disinterest. As we settled in the living room, the conversation inevitably turned to my parents' financial situation. We're managing, my father insisted, though his expression belied his words. Dad, I said gently, I know about the medical bills, the mortgage payments, everything. You don't have to pretend things are fine. My mother looked startled. How did you? I'm good at research, I said simply. And Dad's told me more than he probably realizes during our calls. I turned to Megan, who was still pretending to focus on her phone. What I don't understand is why you're not helping them. You're living here rent-free while they're drowning in debt. Megan's head snapped up, her eyes flashing. Not all of us have fancy engineering degrees and patent royalties, she snapped. Some of us are still trying to figure things out. You're 25, Megan. Mom and Dad are in their late 50s with serious health and financial problems. When exactly are you planning to start contributing? Haley, my mother interjected, your sister is going through a difficult time. No, Mom, I interrupted firmly. This is exactly the problem. You're still making excuses for her while you can barely afford your medication. It needs to stop. To my surprise, my father nodded. She's right, Linda. We can't keep doing this. Megan stood up abruptly. I can't believe this. You come back after 5 years of barely speaking to any of us, and suddenly you're the authority on our family dynamics? You don't get to judge my life. I'm not judging your life, I replied calmly. I'm pointing out that your choices are hurting Mom and Dad. That's just reality. Well, reality is that not everyone gets handed a classic car by Grandpa or has some special genius talent that makes them rich before 30. Megan shouted. Some of us are normal people who struggle. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that escalating would solve nothing. Megan, this isn't about comparing our lives. It's about the fact that Mom and Dad need help, and you're in a position to provide some of that help but aren't doing so. What do you want me to do? I barely make enough from my part-time job to cover my own expenses. You could start by paying rent, I suggested. Or contributing to groceries. Or helping Mom with her medication costs instead of buying designer clothes and salon treatments. Megan's face flushed with anger. You have no idea what my life is like. You've always been the perfect daughter, and I've always been the screw-up. Well, I'm sick of living in your shadow. She grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door. Megan, wait, my father called, but she was already gone, the door slamming behind her. An uncomfortable silence descended on the room. Finally, my mother spoke, her voice small. She'll calm down. She always does. I sighed, moving to sit beside my mother on the couch. Mom, Dad, we need to talk about your situation honestly. No more pretending things are fine when they're not. Over the next 2 hours, we had the most candid conversation of our adult lives. They laid out their financial reality in stark terms. The medical bills that kept mounting, the mortgage they could barely afford, my father's unsuccessful job search, and yes, the ongoing drain of supporting Megan's lifestyle. I want to help, I said finally. Not as a handout, but as an investment in our family's future. We can't take your money, Haley, my father protested. After everything. You're not taking it, I corrected. I'm offering it, with conditions. First, Megan starts contributing or finds somewhere else to live. Second, we look for a more suitable place for you both, something single level that's easier for Mom to navigate and more affordable to maintain. Third, we get Mom in to see a specialist I know in Detroit who's doing groundbreaking work with rheumatoid arthritis treatments. My parents exchanged a long look, having one of those silent conversations that only couples who have been together for decades can have. We need to think about it, my father said finally. This is a lot to process. Of course, I agreed. I'm here for a week. We have time. Later that night, after my mother had gone to bed and Megan still hadn't returned, my father asked me to join him on the small balcony off the living room. We stood side by side, looking out at the parking lot where the Mustang gleamed under the security lights. Your grandfather left that car to you because he saw something in you, my father said quietly. A determination, a meticulous attention to detail, a passion for bringing broken things back to life. I didn't see it then, or I did, but I didn't value it the way he did. He turned to face me, his expression open and vulnerable in a way I'd rarely seen. I'm sorry, Haley. Not just for selling the car, but for not appreciating who you were. For always expecting you to be the strong one, the independent one, while we focused on Megan's needs. It wasn't fair. No, I agreed, it wasn't. But you've become an extraordinary woman despite our mistakes. Maybe even because of them. He smiled sadly. I'd like to think your grandfather would be proud of how you've handled everything, not just restoring the car, but building your life on your own terms. I felt something shift inside me, not a complete healing of old wounds, but the beginning of a new understanding. I think he'd be proud of me for coming back, I said. For not letting resentment keep me away forever. My father nodded, blinking back tears. I'd like to show you something, he said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small, worn photograph and handed it to me. In the dim light, I could make out the image of my grandfather standing beside a much younger version of my father. Between them was a car, not the Mustang, but an older model I didn't recognize. That was your grandfather's first restoration project, my father explained. A 1955 Chevy Bel Air. He sold it to pay for my college tuition when his business hit a rough patch. I was furious with him at the time. I'd helped with that car, loved that car. I looked up in surprise. You never told me that. Because I was ashamed, he admitted. Ashamed that I didn't understand what he was trying to teach me until it was too late. And then I turned around and did the same thing to you with the Mustang. He shook his head. History repeats itself when we don't learn from it. Maybe, I said, handing back the photograph, or maybe some lessons just take a few generations to sink in. We stood in companionable silence for a while longer before returning inside. As I settled onto the pull-out couch that would be my bed for the week, I realized that the Mustang had once again become more than just a car. It was now a vehicle for a different kind of restoration. Not of metal and chrome, but of trust and understanding between a father and daughter who had both lost their way. 6 months after my return to my hometown, I stood in the driveway of a modest ranch-style home, watching my parents explore their new space with cautious excitement. The single-level layout with wide doorways would accommodate my mother's mobility needs as her condition progressed. The manageable yard featured raised garden beds at a height she could tend without bending. The location, just 15 minutes from their old neighborhood, kept them connected to familiar surroundings while providing a fresh start. I hadn't simply bought them a house. That would have perpetuated the dependency patterns our family needed to break. Instead, I'd worked with a financial advisor to structure an arrangement that protected everyone. My parents sold their condo, contributed the proceeds as a down payment, and I covered the remainder. They paid a modest rent that went toward building equity in the property, which would eventually transfer to them. It wasn't charity. It was a sound investment in their stability and our relationship. The changes in our family dynamic hadn't happened overnight. After my initial visit, I'd returned to Michigan to establish a satellite office of Thompson Automotive Consulting in my hometown. The expansion made business sense. The area had a growing tech sector with several companies interested in our services, but the personal benefits were equally significant. My father now worked part-time managing the administrative aspects of the local office. At 59, he wasn't ready for retirement, and his decades of business experience proved valuable in handling client relations and office operations. The position restored his sense of purpose and dignity while providing income that helped with their expenses. "Haley," he called from the kitchen, "come see this view of the backyard. Your mother's already planning where to plant her roses." I joined my parents at the large kitchen window that overlooked a small but sunny yard. My mother stood with her arm linked through my father's, her face more relaxed than I'd seen it in years. "I thought maybe a cherry tree on the left side," she said, pointing. "To replace the one from our old house." The mention of the tree she'd planted when I was born, a gesture I hadn't known she remembered so specifically, caught me by surprise. "I'd like that," I said simply. My mother's health had stabilized thanks to the specialist I'd connected her with in Detroit. The new treatment protocol hadn't cured her rheumatoid arthritis, but it had significantly reduced her pain and slowed the progression of joint damage. More importantly, she'd started therapy to address the anxiety that had fueled much of her enabling behavior toward Megan. Speaking of my sister, her story had taken an unexpected turn. After storming out during my visit, she'd stayed with friends for several days before returning to have what my father described as the most honest conversation we've ever had with her. The truth that emerged was more complex than simple entitlement. Megan had spent years feeling inadequate compared to my academic achievements and close relationship with our grandfather. Rather than developing her own strengths, she leaned into being the needy child, unconsciously recognizing that our parents responded to dependency. Their attention and financial support had become her way of feeling valued. The family intervention that followed wasn't easy. There were tears, accusations, and painful acknowledgments on all sides. But ultimately, Megan agreed to professional counseling and to find her own apartment within 2 months. To everyone's surprise, perhaps most of all her own, Megan discovered an aptitude for event planning through a temporary job coordinating a charity fundraiser. She'd since built a small but growing business organizing local corporate events, utilizing her social skills in a productive way. She was still finding her footing financially, but for the first time, she was genuinely independent. Our relationship remained complicated. Years of rivalry and resentment couldn't be erased in months, but we'd established a tentative truce based on mutual respect for each other's separate paths. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway interrupted my thoughts. Through the window, I watched Megan emerge from her used Honda Civic, a practical vehicle she'd purchased herself to replace the gas-guzzling Jeep our parents had helped fund years ago. "Perfect timing," my mother said. "She's bringing lunch from that new deli downtown." As my sister entered carrying bags of food, I noticed the changes in her appearance: simpler clothing, less dramatic makeup, a more natural hair color. But the most significant change was in her demeanor. A newfound confidence that came from earning her own way rather than performing for attention. "Kitchen's nice," she commented, setting down the bags. "Better than that closet they called a kitchen in the condo." After lunch, while my parents unpacked boxes in their bedroom, I found myself alone with Megan in the living room, arranging books on the built-in shelves. "Thanks," she said abruptly, not looking at me as she aligned a row of my mother's favorite novels. "For lunch?" "It was your treat," I replied, deliberately misunderstanding. Megan rolled her eyes, a familiar gesture that was somehow comforting in its familiarity. "For not giving up on them. On us. You could have just sent money from Michigan and washed your hands of the whole mess." I considered this as I unpacked another box of books. That wouldn't have fixed anything. And I didn't come back just for them. She looked at me then, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in years. I know, she said quietly. You came back for yourself too. To finish things properly. The insight surprised me. Maybe therapy was helping her develop perception along with self-awareness. Do you remember, she continued, that time when we were kids and Grandpa took us fishing at Lake Mercer? You caught that huge bass, and I was so jealous I pushed you into the water. I laughed at the memory. And then you felt so guilty you jumped in after me, even though you couldn't swim very well. Grandpa had to rescue both of us, Megan said, smiling. He wasn't even mad. He just said, Thompson girls don't do anything halfway, do they? The shared memory created a moment of genuine connection between us. Not enough to erase the past, but enough to suggest that perhaps our future relationship could be built on something more substantial than competition and resentment. That evening, after Megan had left and my parents had retired to their new bedroom, exhausted from moving day, I sat on the front porch with a cup of tea. The Mustang was parked in the driveway, its silhouette distinctive in the gathering dusk. On impulse, I took my tea and the keys and slid into the driver's seat. The leather was cool against my back, the steering wheel smooth beneath my palms. I didn't start the engine, I just sat there, thinking about the journey this car had taken me on, literally and figuratively. When my grandfather left me the Mustang, he wasn't just giving me a vehicle, he was giving me a lesson in value. Not just the monetary value of a classic car, but the value of persistence, of craftsmanship, of seeing potential where others saw only rust and dents. He was teaching me that sometimes the things most worth having are the ones you have to rebuild yourself. My parents had failed to understand that lesson when they sold the car. But in a strange way, their mistake had set me on a path that proved the lesson more powerfully than if they'd respected my inheritance. I had built myself along with rebuilding the car, becoming someone stronger, more capable, and ultimately more forgiving than I might otherwise have been. The following weekend, I organized a family outing, a drive in the Mustang to my grandfather's favorite spot, a scenic overlook about an hour from town. My father sat in the passenger seat, my mother and Megan in the back. As we cruised along country roads, the autumn leaves creating a kaleidoscope of color around us, I found myself thinking about the difference between revenge and redemption. I had initially tracked down the Mustang with something like revenge in mind, a desire to show my family what they had thrown away, both in terms of the car and in terms of their relationship with me. But somewhere along the way, the project had transformed into something else. A journey toward healing rather than retribution. As we reached the overlook and parked, all four of us sat in silence for a moment, taking in the spectacular view of rolling hills and the river valley below. Then, without discussion, we got out and walked to the guardrail. Your grandfather proposed to your grandmother here, my father said suddenly. Did he ever tell you that? I shook my head, surprised. No, he never mentioned it. It was right after he came back from Korea, my father continued. He said he wanted to show her that no matter how bad things got, and they'd been pretty bad in the war, there was always something beautiful waiting if you just kept going. My mother slipped her hand into my father's, her swollen fingers entwined with his. Megan stood slightly apart, taking photos of the view with her phone, not for social media, I realized, but simply to remember the moment. I thought about my grandfather's words, about beauty waiting for those who persevered. The Mustang hadn't just been waiting for me, I'd had to search for it, fight for it, rebuild it piece by piece. The same was true of my relationship with my family. The betrayal had happened, the hurt was real, but healing was possible with effort and time. That evening, back at my parents' new home, I sat with my father on the back patio. The cherry tree my mother wanted wouldn't be planted until spring, but we could already envision how it would look, how it would grow over the years. You know, my father said, when your grandfather left you that car, I was a little hurt. I thought maybe he'd leave it to me, and then I could pass it on to you someday. Why do you think he didn't? I asked, curious about this perspective I'd never considered. My father thought for a moment. Because he knew you'd appreciate it in a way I never could. And because he understood something about you that took me much longer to see. What's that? That you needed to know someone believed in you completely, without reservation. That you needed a legacy that was yours alone, not something filtered through your parents' expectations. He smiled sadly. He was right, of course. I just wish I'd understood it before we made such a terrible mistake. We can't change the past, I said, echoing words my grandfather had often used. We can only rebuild what's broken and drive on. My father laughed. Is that a car metaphor I hear from the automotive engineer? Occupational hazard, I admitted with a smile. In the months that followed, our family continued the delicate work of rebuilding. We established new boundaries, new ways of communicating, new respect for each other's separate journeys. It wasn't always smooth, old patterns sometimes reasserted themselves, and progress wasn't linear. But like the restoration of a classic car, the process itself became valuable. Each small repair, each replaced part, each careful adjustment brought us closer to something that worked better than before. Not perfect, not brand new, but authentic and roadworthy. I established the Robert Thompson Memorial Scholarship for Young Mechanics at the local community college, using some of my patent royalties to fund an annual award that covered tuition and tools for a promising student. The first recipient was a 17-year-old girl who reminded me of myself, determined, meticulous, and passionate about bringing old engines back to life. Sometimes the car isn't just a car, and the journey back isn't just about the miles. It's about rebuilding engines and relationships, one part at a time. My grandfather understood that when he left me the Mustang. It just took the rest of us a little longer to learn the lesson. Have you ever had something precious taken from you that you later reclaimed? Or have you experienced a family conflict that eventually led to healing? Share your story in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you navigated your own journey of rebuilding what was broken. Don't forget to like this video if you found something valuable in my story, subscribe for more real-life experiences, and share with someone who might need to hear that sometimes losing what you love can eventually lead you to become someone stronger. Thank you for being part of this journey with me, and remember, the road ahead is always worth the drive.